The CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you are serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars, your audio, your terms.
Listen, it's getting closer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet? Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
You're listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, a delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information featuring the Tandy Color Computer. All right, Coconuts, welcome back to CoCo Crew episode 13. We had a little discussion here about whether or not if we should be superstitious and skip the number 13 and go to 14, thereby correcting our odd numbering. But we decided that would cause more confusion than it was worth. So here we are, lucky number 13. I am John Linville, and I'm, of course, here with
Neil Blanchard.
and we are the CoCo Crew. So I hope everyone's been having a nice end of spring and early summer. It's been pretty hot here until the last couple of days. Now it's back to the low 80s. A very pleasant Saturday afternoon for me today.
The low 80s sounds like Canadian weather you have over there.
It's pretty nice, although my wife is headed up north to visit her sister with the kids, and I understand they're expecting 100-degree days or something like that. For some reason, the silly northern folks don't air condition their homes. So it seems to be a thing that happens to them whenever they head up, and that's when the heat wave hits. And my poor southern kids that are used to being air conditioned to the point where you can see your breath in the house, go up north where it's supposed to be comfortable and cool, and instead they sweat it out.
Yeah, they're not too happy with that.
No. Oh, well. So anyway, here we are. It's the middle of June, closer to the end of June. CoCo Fest is about 10 months away. Are you excited about CoCo Fest 26 here, Neil?
Oh, definitely. I'm already thinking of projects for it.
Oh, yeah? You going to pick up your photo booth project, or you think maybe you'll do something new?
That's still in the works. It's a back burner, though, that one.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Once they slip away, sometimes they don't come back, right?
Yeah. Still looking for the right digitizer on that one.
Oh, yeah. Very cool. Well, so anyway, what have you been working on lately?
Unfortunately, not really much CoCo related.
Yeah.
And, work's been pretty busy and helping my mom move, so that's been a big task. But she's pretty much all settled in now, so that's good.
That's cool.
New location, so hopefully get back to the CoCo.
Yeah. What about your Commodore friend, the girl, the Amiga?
Oh, the Amiga. Yeah, that's true. I've been kind of, cheating on the CoCo a little bit here. We got my dog here.
Dog problems.
Hold on. We got to pause here for a second.
Okay.
I've been cheating on the CoCo side, I guess, a little bit. Been playing with a couple of Amigas here.
Yeah.
Magically got those Amigas on my way home from North Carolina.
Oh, how did that happen?
They just end up at the back of my car, and
yeah, I've been. Strangely enough, my Amigas disappeared right after you were left. I'm not sure what happened to them. Anyway, well, that's cool. I been working on some technical segment stuff. I had a blog post. We're going to mention that a little bit later in the news, and been working on another blog post that I'll also probably feed into next month's tech segment. It's mostly about work that's already done, but sometimes you have to document things, right?
That's good reference.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, that's cool. It is the summertime. Maybe get a little extra free time and settle in, or maybe we'll have to wait till it cools off to do some more CoCo stuff. We'll see. There is that silly podcast thing that we've got going, right? How about anything on eBay? You do anything fun on eBay lately?
I haven't done anything on eBay, but probably the coolest thing has happened to me, CoCo related, for acquiring a couple CoCos. My brother-in-law sent me a text message a few weeks ago and said, do you like Tandy computers?
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, that's, what a question, right? I said, yeah, definitely. I mean, that could be any Tandy, right?
Right.
He works at the dump, local dump here in town, and somebody tossed out a CoCo 2 and a CoCo 3 mint in the box with the plastic.
Wow.
And a CM8 monitor. I couldn't believe it. So he put them on my doorstep. I was working. I come home, and on my doorstep, I see these 3 items sitting there. I couldn't believe it.
It's like the Tandy Santa has come.
Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, am I dreaming? After I'm thinking, that's sacrilege. I mean, who would throw out, 2 perfectly good CoCos and a CM8 monitor?
Well, especially since that's about $400 worth of gear there on eBay if it's in good shape.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that was neat. And then the other item I recently got was from Richard Ivey. He's on the Facebook group. He had the RAT software for the mouse. It's from Dicom. It's a graphics package. So I've been looking for that because I have the mouse, but I never had the software. So I'm looking forward to giving that a try.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Richard seems to have some cool stuff in his possession. Maybe he can transfer the rest of his stuff around to some of us. That'd be cool.
How about yourself?
So I've got, my usual round of pickups, but yeah, I'm incorrigible. But I did have a few highlights. Somebody, I'm always a little torn when it comes to buying paper magazines. I think that should probably be a host topic at some point. What do you do with your paper magazines? But I saw, we mentioned a couple of months ago where someone had done scans and made the micro, the 6502, and later the 6502/6809 journal, had made those available. Mm-hmm. So I saw a group of them come available on eBay for not too much money, and I went ahead and bought them because I'm a paper kind of guy. I like to flip through and smell the old paper, and it's just easier to pause and take a look at the ads and stuff when it's paper in your hand or whatever. So I got a group of them, about I think it was about 8 issues, and there's some cool stuff. There's some pretty good CoCo coverage in the ones that I've got there, programs for the CoCo.
Oh, really?
And some hardware stuff too. So it reinforces that it's a worthwhile magazine to check out. So either in paper or in the links that we covered in an earlier show, you should go and check it out. Anyway, moving on eBay, I guess Tim Lindner made available, I guess it was his own copy of Marty's Nightmare. I know you were lucky enough to get the Marty Goodman copy of Marty's Nightmare a couple of months ago there at CoCo Fest.
At the Fest, yeah.
But so now I've got a copy. So I never figured I'd actually get an actual copy of that since it's kind of on the rare side. But, I do. I have to pop it in and play it sometime and have some fun. And
it's a good game.
enjoy Marty's Nightmare. Let's see. One other thing that I got that was kind of neat. Unfortunately, it's Commodore 64 specific. But I was flipping through and I see this thing, Program Protection Manual, Commodore 64. And it's some kind of, a book, although it seems almost more like a newsletter. Anyway, it goes through and talks about some of the copy protection schemes used for protecting, in this case, Commodore 64 diskettes. I don't know. I think some of the techniques might sort of be generally applicable, things like bad sectors or or with a grain of salt, maybe some of the stuff they use for protecting basic might be useful in terms of tricking the basic interpreter into doing funny things or whatever.
Right.
So I don't know. I've got that. I've skimmed it a little bit. It's kind of a neat read. Like I say, it's a Commodore 64 thing, not really CoCo, but I thought it was pretty interesting, so I'm sharing.
Yeah, disk copy protection. That's right up my alley. I like that.
Yeah.
I've always found that interesting.
I think it would be fun. There's a guy who does who's doing hacks or breaking Apple II games and making them available on archive.org. He has a pseudonym of 4 a.m. And the guy seems to be unstoppable. And he does these wonderful write-ups of every technical detail of how he figured out how the copy protection works and how he breaks it. And some of them are pretty elaborate.
That's awesome.
So I don't know. It's inspirational. It'd be cool to go through and do some breaks like that. If anybody is inspired by the hacker side of life and wants to do some write-ups on CoCo software, we would definitely publicize that for you. So hint, hint.
Maybe someone could take a crack at Plateau of the Past.
Well, maybe so. So anyway, my final item I thought I'd mention is the original CoCo joysticks. I always call them the Black Beauties because they're the black plastic and they're anything but beautiful, really. But I don't really like them, but I've got them partly just because there are a few games that sort of benefit from the non-centering, and I don't know, just for completeness. But a lot of the ones you find, they have a black plastic handle. But some of the original ones had a metallic handle. A set came available, and bidding was pretty low, so I went ahead and bought that. So I got a set of the original joysticks with the silver handle. So
the other cool thing with those silver handle ones is that most or all the ones I've ever noticed are always made in Japan.
Oh yeah,
the other ones were outsourced.
Huh. Interesting. Well, yep. So anyway, that's my eBay comments. Well, that's probably a pretty good introduction for our episode up and coming. Got a pretty good episode lined up, along with our usual long list of news, and we've got a little feedback, and of course our usual tech segments and Games Corner. I think we're going to have a little host discussion thrown in there, and sort of our feature segment is going to be an interview with a fellow named Wes Kuzmal, who was the founder of the service that became Delphi. Wes is a pretty cool guy. I enjoyed talking to him, and I hope you guys will enjoy listening to him. But so anyway, we're going to take a little break here, and then we'll be back with some announcements. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that message from our sponsors. And now we are back with our announcements, our standard announcements. First, we, of course, are the CoCo Crew Podcast. We are available on Twitter as at CoCo Crew Podcast, all one word, of course. We're also available on Facebook, where we have a page, and that's the space CoCo space Crew space podcast, or as I like to say, the CoCo Crew Podcast. Go ahead and search for us. I'm sure you'll find us. In addition, we are, of course, available through iTunes. We are available for streaming on Stitcher, and we are available through Google Play's podcast service. We are a member of the Throwback Network. If you're not familiar with that, if you're a regular listener by now, you ought to be. But the Throwback Network is a collated or a collected list of retro-themed podcasts, many of which are technology related, some of which are not, but they all are retro. So if you like to get your retro on, then you should definitely check out the Throwback Network. The link is in the show notes. In addition, we are listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. So this is also a list of retro-themed podcasts, in this case, retro-themed technology podcasts, mostly about gaming and computer platforms from essentially from the 80s. Maybe there's some 70s and 90s thrown in there. But anyway, if you enjoy our podcast, you'll probably enjoy a number of the ones listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. Audio for the CoCo Crew is, of course, hosted at Cyber Ears. If you have a need to host audio files or your own podcast or whatever, I highly recommend you check out Cyber Ears, where they will give you your audio on your terms. If you want to reach us via email, we have some addresses set up. These will reach both Neil and I. We are available as show, SHOW, at CoCoCrew.org, podcast at CoCoCrew.org, and of course as feedback at CoCoCrew.org. Should you desire to reach just one of us, I am available as John, JOHN, at CoCoCrew.org, and Neil is available as Neil, NEIL, at CoCoCrew.org. As part of our announcements, we'd like to cover some upcoming events that may be of interest to our retro-themed listeners. So first up in our list now is Kansas Fest. Kansas Fest is, of course, it's summer camp for, in this case, for Apple II users, Apple II enthusiasts, shall we say. This is hosted at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri. And let's see, early bird registration has ended, but I'm pretty sure you could still manage to get in. The link for Kansas Fest will be available in the show notes. They are Apple II folks, but, they're friendly. So do go and check it out. I went once and had a great time. Let's see. So that is Kansas Fest, July 19th through 24th, 2016. On July 30th of 2016, there is Atari Party. This is being held at the Yolo County Public Library in Davis, California. This is an event to celebrate old video games, including a hands-on living museum, opportunity to play lots of old games, arcade and video games, 8-bit computers, all that sort of stuff. It is, of course, Atari themed, but, I think most of us enjoy a little Atari sometimes, from time to time, except for Neil. He's pretty anti-Atari.
I don't know about that.
I'm sure I heard you say boo Atari once. No.
I got my 2600 here.
We all have our Atari experiences, and we're not ashamed anymore. So, Atari Party, I think you mostly just have to request an invite if you want to go, or it is a public place. Maybe you can just show up. I don't know. The link's in the show notes. Coming up August 6th and 7th of 2016, of course, is the Vintage Computer Festival West, which is 11 or XI. This is, I think, the first time they've had a Vintage Computer Festival out west in a while. So this is being held at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, which is a pretty cool place to go if you've never been. It's an opportunity to go and see some old computers and some old people who like computers.
You might see a CoCo set up there. I think Tim Linder is going to go down and represent.
That's right. I believe Tim Linder will be there. Maybe he'll donate a CoCo to the museum, which I think has unfortunately overlooked our favorite machine in the actual display. I think they do have a dragon, but, otherwise, still a nice place to visit. All right, September 10th and 11th of 2016, of course, is the Vintage Computer Festival Midwest 11, and that's the Arabic numerals 11, not XI. Let's see. This is, of course, held in the Chicago area in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. And their webpage has time left until VCFMW, and it's 83 days, 12 hours, 11 minutes, and 42 seconds. Anyway, another VCF event, lots of old computers. I think the group that sponsors this event grew out of a Commodore users group, so there's a little bit of a tilt towards Commodore stuff there, but still I think they're friendly, and they seem like a good group of guys. They come and interact with us at CoCo Fest out in the Chicago area. So I hope if you have a chance, you'll go out and support them at their event. Neil's been to this event.
Yeah, it's a great event.
Here's one I would like to go to, but have not been convinced myself to organize yet, I guess is what it comes down to. October 21st through the 23rd, the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. By all of accounts, this is a great event. They have arcade setups, and they have cool speakers and lots of games and such set up. It's a 3-day event. You can purchase tickets now. They have a website with a lot of flashy graphics on it. Some sort of film screening, the new 8-Bit Heroes. Probably sounds like a homebrew documentary of some sort. I'm not sure. Looks like a cool event. I would like to get out there. I'm probably not going to make it this year. But if you are in the Pacific Northwest part of the United States, or in that part of Canada as well, you could probably make it over. I would recommend it. It looks like a cool event. And that's most of it, except, of course, we are already announcing April 22nd and 23rd of 2017 will be the 26th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest. Get your room reservations now. I'm sure it's going to be a big event. We are already starting to plan the event and having some kind of already been through the post-mortem retrospectives and such, and starting to think about next year's event. I think I'll be this past year I helped kind of at the last minute with some of the scheduling of talks and such, and looks like coming up we're going to formalize that for next year. So hopefully I can recruit a good round of speakers for that event. Should be fun. If nothing else, I've got a lot of list of news items of people making announcements each month. If I have to, I can go and beg those guys to talk. Anyway, well, I think that covers our announcements for this month. So we're going to take another little break, and then we'll be back with another monster news segment. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a sec.
Okay, but why Tandy Computers? In a word, quality. We do it all, from custom-designed semiconductors to the finished product. Tandy business computers are manufactured in our own USA plants. We test and retest and test again to ensure one of the highest standards of quality in the industry. And Radio Shack provides total service and support. I'm convinced.
Tandy Computers at Radio Shack Computer Centers. In business, for business.
All right, Cocoa Nuts, we are now back for some news. We're going to start off the news with something that's really not entirely CoCo related. I hope it's not CoCo related at all. Really, it's a thread over on Atari Age, which maybe hopefully many of us are familiar with. It's called Atari Age. They actually cater to a number of retro gaming topics. It's a pretty good web forum kind of site if you're into that. So there's a topic with the somewhat provocative headline of the video game homebrew crash of 2016. And so the notion here is that, with a lot of, whereas the CoCo homebrews are still a bit new, I think, especially with us producing actual cartridges and such, some of the other retro platforms like the Atari 2600 and the Intellivision and some of the other, particularly the gaming systems, have been having some homebrew releases for a while. And including usually they're recycled cartridge cases, but they have labels and boxes and instructions and whatever. And then enough that now they're starting to get a kind of a variety of production qualities. Some lesser, some are closer to just a card in a bag or whatever. It's kind of the complaint that some people are making games that aren't necessarily technically very astute or whatever, or they're using, there's a basic programming environment for the Atari called Batari that some people kind of deride as being a little too easy. It allows relatively low skilled, at least in terms of writing Atari programs, relatively low skilled people able to makes them able to produce Atari games, that sort of thing. And so it's a long thread, a lot of discussion, a lot of back and forth about, well, is more content better or not? Do you have to have the expensive limited release, in production quality boxes, or is it okay to put a cartridge in a bag and sell it or whatever? I don't know. I don't think the CoCo is really to the point of having much discussion like this, because at least for now, I think our production quality is doing pretty well between me and John Strong. Granted, I'm not living up to John's production quality of including a hang tag, but we do have cardboard boxes and shrink wrap and brand new cartridge cases. But whatever. Hopefully everyone's happy with the quality of the games. But I'm sure there's a possibility for some criticism there. Personally, I'm down on the side of let's get more content out there. Let's have people produce games, and if there's somebody else who likes them, then it's really none of your business. Let's just stay out of it. But if you don't like them, don't buy them, right? Anyway, I thought the topic was kind of interesting, provocative, so I thought I'd include it here in case people want to check it out, add their 2 cents, or just see what everyone else has to say. Moving on, I have a story from BBC News. That's some sort of fly-by-night rag that pretends to cover news over in Europe or something. Anyway, it's there'd been some news about how about some old systems still in use by particularly the U.S. government and particularly by the U.S. military, and how there's some missile silos that still have computers using floppy disks in their control system. I'm not sure, obviously the implication is supposed to be that it means we're going to accidentally launch nukes on somebody or something like that. But is a story about the legacy of the floppy disk, and some assertions there that they're actually pretty solid technically. And I included them there. I thought Neil would like it since he is Mr. Floppy.
Yeah, that was a great article. You sent that over to me. The other thing I thought fascinating was that their Verbatim, I believe was the company, is still producing discs.
Yeah.
That's cool. I had no idea.
Yeah. Well, they are for now.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. The next item, this one's more CoCo related. This is from Jason Lee Steer. He has an update on his TRS sticks or TR sticks. Oh, I'm not sure how he pronounces it, but his Tandy joystick to USB adapter. This allow you to use your the original Black Beauty style joysticks, or the maybe the deluxe joysticks from your CoCo, and then use them through USB to an emulator running on your modern machine. Looks like he's got an enclosure picked out, and it sounds like he's getting close to setting pricing, that sort of stuff. It's a cool project, and I'm glad to see some progress on it, and hope to see them come out.
It's cool that it's the opposite of what we did.
Yeah, it is. Well, both niches need to be filled, right?
That's right.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing, Jason. The next one is a story. Comes to us from Jim Cox. Says CoCo used for audiology. There we go. Which of course is for testing hearing. Story. This is basically an anecdote direct from Jim. This is about 20 years ago. He's attending diabetic education class, and noticed CoCo 1 with a cartridge, and it had a custom label with a name as Autolizer or something like that. So anyway, just an anecdote of a CoCo being used in a medical application back in the day. I thought that was kind of cool. We see stuff like this, not specifically this, but once in a while you'll see something pop up on eBay. There's one not too long ago where it had a property tag for the New York Times or something, and the guy selling it thinks it makes it worth $400 or whatever.
That auction is still online, by the way.
Yeah, no doubt. And that one not only it's a little silly, but then the product tag for the New York Times that's supposed to make it so valuable, could just be an empty tag because it's got no number on it. It could just be somebody found one and stuck it on their CoCo. Anyway, but it is cool. The CoCo was used. It seems like there's a number of examples that have popped up from time to time where somebody had a CoCo that they just pretty much picked up off the shelf from Radio Shack or, maybe in a bulk deal from Tandy, but then just pressed it into service in some sort of application that, today we'd consider an embedded application, and you'd probably build a box and not know there was a computer in it at all. But back then, I guess it was just a way to do it. So, oh yeah, we're high tech. We've got a computer involved. Here's our CoCo.
Well, back then, if you wanted something, you had to invent it.
Well, that's true.
There wasn't an app for that.
No app for that. That's right. Okay, so moving on. The next one's a little report from someone named John Day. And John Day is working on a little project where he's taking the concept of the Temple of Rom game cartridge from the CoCo days. I guess that's Rick Adams' baby, right? He is building it out as a 3D first-person kind of game. He's got some screenshots where you're exploring the maze in the temple, and looks like you're in some alien hellish landscape or whatever, but it looks pretty cool. Did you see this one, Neil? Are you?
No, I haven't seen that one.
Oh, I figured you'd be gnashing at the teeth to play that one.
No, but I do want to check it out now.
So it's pretty cool. We should, we've been meaning to talk to Rick Adams. We should get his opinion of this when we do.
Yeah, he'd probably be honored.
Yep, I would imagine so. Anyway, so thanks for sharing, John. We'll look forward to future progress. All right, so the next one, this is not entirely CoCo related either, but it's a link to a YouTube video, and then the title is Atari 800 XL in your pocket. So clearly it's related to the Atari 800 rather than the CoCo. But the notion is this guy has taken, I guess you call it an HDMI stick. So it's like a little device that just plugs right into an HDMI input on a TV or monitor. But inside is a computer that I guess is running some version of Android. The person that's in the video here, which is a Nir Dari, which I think is a fairly well-known person in the Atari community. He's taken his Android HDMI stick and set it up to where it boots into an Atari 800 emulator. And so I guess his notion is you can take it with you and you stay in a hotel room. Nowadays you can find an open HDMI port on your TV and plug it in, and then you can it probably uses a USB keyboard or something so that so that you can do you can get your Atari fix in the hotel. But the thing is, if you can make it run an Atari emulator, I'm pretty sure you could make it run a CoCo emulator, don't you think?
Well, for sure.
So this is a request and hopefully it provides some inspiration to some of you out there to do a similar project. And Chris Hawks shows up to CoCo Fest with a kind of similar project where he boots up a CoCo emulator on a Raspberry Pi that he then is installed in a CoCo 3 case. Maybe we need to get Chris Hawks one of these HDMI sticks and see if he can get it the CoCo emulator booting up on that. That might be cool. Nira, I don't know if you're listening or not, since you're an Atari 800 guy, but if you are, thanks for sharing, and don't be surprised if you hear from a CoCo guy asking you how you did it. All right, moving on. Bouncy Ball 2 progress report. So this comes from Lee Patterson. Lee, of course, is the developer behind Bouncy Ball. Maybe I should say lead developer, because I think he was already working somewhat as a team with Simon Jonason. I know he's working with Simon on Bouncy Ball 2, and definitely they seem to be trying to step up the game quite a bit. Bouncy Ball 2 is going to be a CoCo 3 game and use some expanded graphics and whatever. I know Simon's working hard at doing some nifty sprite code and some music playing code and whatever. And so for his part, of course, Lee has provided this blog post with some documentation on the state of the project, and I'm sure he is hard at work coding up levels and doing all that kind of stuff. It's always good to have more projects coming in our community, more games, more code, whatever. So glad to see it. And so Lee, thanks for sharing. Did you check it out, Neil?
I did. It looks like they're having fun hacking the Gimme chip too.
Yeah.
They're having fun over there.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so moving on, we've got an announcement from Ed Snyder, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. He posts a picture of a PCB layout, and it looks like a daughter board to plug into a CoCo VGA, which is a project I think we talked about last month, to provide a replacement for the 6847 that outputs VGA style signals, so that you can use a VGA monitor with the older CoCos. But this one appears to be he says a CPU upgrade board, which includes a 6309 CPU, but it doesn't seem to be one to replace. As far as I can tell, it's not replacing the CoCo's CPU. It's doing some kind of work on the board, on the CoCo VGA board. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's where I was lost. When I saw the 6309, I was like, what?
So I don't know. Maybe we can beg for some feedback from Ed or whoever that understands what this project is doing, and spell it out for us a little bit better. But so anyway, I'm not sure why they need a CPU, and if they did need a CPU, if they're going to go ahead and use new technology for the rest of it, why they wouldn't go ahead and put an AVR or an ARM or whatever on there. But hey, it's their project. They can do it however they want. So it's cool if they want to use a retro CPU to do something on that board. More power to them. I think that's pretty cool. All right, well, moving on. So here's another one sort of been making around on some of the retro podcasts and such. Not entirely CoCo related, or not really at all, but this guy named Matt Lacey has a write-up. Says, writing a game in assembly for an old computer taught me lessons relevant today. And so his little adventure he's describing here is a game written for it's really for the Atari ST, written for the Atari ST, or maybe it's actually for the Falcon, which is a later version of the ST. The Falcon to the Atari ST is kind of like the CoCo 3 to the rest of the CoCos, kind of an enhanced version.
Just a lot more rare.
Yeah, it's a lot more rare, that's for sure. Anyway, there's no great revelation here. It's just kind of a nice read. Nice to see somebody enjoying themselves and writing about retro stuff. And so I encourage you all to go off on your own little project and do your own write-up, and we can talk about that in a later episode. All right, moving on. Just included too many things. A lot of things this month that aren't strictly speaking CoCo related, but they keep us a part of the larger retro community. So this one is an announcement. It says Sega lets modders, that's modders, like one who makes modifications. Sega lets modders get freaky with its classic games. And so apparently Sega has added some sort of official ROM hacking support to Steam, which is a platform for running games on modern machines. And some of the games that it runs are modern games, and some of them are emulated. And in this case, if you're running the emulated games that were from the Sega Genesis, Sega's provided support through Steam where you can do your own what are typically called ROM hacks. And so it's the kind of thing where you go through and you replace the graphics of a character with different graphics, and you can turn turn Sonic into Mario or turn Mario into Pauline or whatever you're into. If our audience includes the kind of people who like doing that sort of stuff and who also enjoy the Sega Genesis, well, here you go. There's some stuff out there for you to do. And if nothing else, it's lets you know there's other people out there doing some cool stuff.
Yeah, just to add to that real quick, Steam is a great platform. I mean, that's allowed a lot of homebrew games, not just top titles, but I mean it's basically brought gaming back to PC as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I know Steam has been for those who are interested in Linux as a gaming platform, Steam has always sort of been a sort of as they used to say, a great white hope, shall we say. But I'm not sure it's how much it's fulfilled the promise there, but it certainly is a way to get some gaming time in under a Linux platform. All right, well, so moving on to the next item for the truly nerdy among us. Says computer scientists quantify just how hard Super Mario Brothers is. Again, not strictly a CoCo topic, but sort of in the same realm. And so it's a description here of how, if you were a mathematician kind of person, that you can look at how you solve Mario levels as sort of a math problem. And apparently, if you do that, then those math problems belong to a class of problems referred to as P-space complete. And so I don't know. I don't necessarily like to think that hard about it as games when I'm playing them. But if you are the kind of person that likes to think about the mathematical modeling or mathematical measurement of complexity of a game or that sort of thing, you may want to check this article out and then see if you can come back and apply it to Donut Dilemma or
Farfall.
Farfall, maybe. I don't know. If you do that, we would, of course, love to hear your complete analysis, and Neil will be sure to review all your equations. All right. Well, moving on. We've veered long enough outside of the world of CoCo. We'll try to pull it back in here now. So this one is an announcement from Ron Klein. Excuse me. So Ron has taken an interest in my CoCo 3 digital video player, which I demoed some years ago, which allows you to download digital video like off of YouTube and put it through a processing step that turns it into a blob of data that can be loaded through say the Super IDE card into your CoCo 3 and can produce full motion digital video on your Color Computer 3. And I had made the source of this available and basically had been ignored for a number of years. But Ron came along and took an interest in it, and he asked some questions and expressed interest in using it. And he's supposed to be documenting, what steps were left out of the meager documentation I had provided. And it sounds like there are a few things that maybe had changed where some of the tools had gone through different revisions or whatever, or you needed something new to go with them. But anyway, so he eventually got success on his project, and he posted a video of him playing videos on his CoCo 3 in his underground lair, also known as his basement. And I don't know, obviously I think this is really cool to see somebody take an interest in a project I did and get some enjoyment out of it. And hopefully it's inspiring him to either extend the project or do his own project and become a key part of the community. Who knows? Maybe in 4 or 5 years, maybe he can have his own podcast. That'd be kind of cool. So bright future ahead for you, Ron.
Maybe Ron will be saying that's a little more than I signed up for.
Whoa! I didn't sign up for that.
Yeah.
Oh well. Anyway, hopefully he's enjoying himself, and hopefully you've enjoyed hearing about it. How about that? All right. So moving on, we have a little announcement from Brendan Donahue. Brendan is one of the key players working on the CoCo VGA we mentioned earlier in relation to Ed Snyder. Well, Ed's working with Brendan on this, and His announcement is that they now have a CoCo VGA enhanced 6847 working in a T1 style of lowercase, which so he's referring to, I guess their original emulation of the 6847 was of course the original 6847, as used in all the CoCo 1s and at least the earlier CoCo 2s and most other machines that use the 6847. But of course, later CoCo 2s had a version of the 6847 that had been modified a bit, special for Tandy, and it included support for lowercase, actual true lowercase characters, as opposed to just inverted characters. So people were asking if CoCo VGA would be able to support that, and so Brendan's been working towards that, and it looks like, they at least have at least initial support for that. So that's cool. So when CoCo VGA gets here, it should be able to display in proper lower or true lowercase.
That's going to be neat to see.
Yep, pretty cool. All right, moving on. We're still announcing these because we don't know how long they'll keep coming. But so we now have chapter 28 of Popstar Pilot's development blog. And it's sounding like Nick is getting closer and closer to the end. And hopefully he will get his tuning done and get us a game before long. It looks like he's got some promo videos available. And pretty exciting stuff. I can't wait to see Popstar Pilot when it's finally released. I know you're excited, Neil.
Oh, definitely. That video is great. You can see the gameplay. He's got to be close. I mean, that looks amazing.
Yep, very cool. The next piece of news comes to us from Rogelio Perea. I hope that's close to a reasonable pronunciation. It's not necessarily his project, but it's a cool project nonetheless. So the DB19 connector is other than, well, of course, the DB9 or DB25 and DB9 was what people call it, although technically is the DE9, the 9-pin serial port or joystick port on the Atari. We're all familiar with those. So the DB19 is basically the same style of connector, but with 19 pins in it. And the DB19 was used for disk drives on the Apple II and maybe some other machines, some of the Macintosh and Next, and I think some of the Atari computers may have used them for something as well. So apparently, while the DB25 and the DB or DE9 continue to survive, probably because of the popularity for a number of things in the past, the DB19 was not quite as popular, and so now has kind of fallen out of availability. And so people making peripherals for the Apple II, particularly disk drive replacements, were actually running out of them. They couldn't find them at all. They kind of cleared out all the surplus and were facing a point where they either wouldn't be able to make the replacements, floppy drive replacements, or would only be able to do so if people rewired their computers to accept a different kind of connector. You can imagine how popular that idea was.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to find the name here. Let's say this guy, the floppy guy.
And that's not me. This time.
Yeah, it's a different floppy guy. I'm sorry, I can't find the name here. Maybe if I can dig it up, I'll put it in the show notes or something. But so he had looked at different options for these connectors, see if he could maybe construct them himself out of like cutting DB25s in half or making them himself somehow, and just couldn't find a reasonable way to do that. And so he actually looked around to see if he could actually get DB19 connectors actually manufactured. And because we live in sort of a golden age of communications and small scale manufacturing and that sort of thing, he managed to go through Alibaba or whatever and found a manufacturer in China that would talk to him about making them. Of course, the minimum order size was 10,000 pieces.
Oh, wow.
which is a pretty big order of anything. But he managed to get it done and produce the mechanical drawings that were necessary to make it happen. And he ordered them, and he received the shipment, and he's got pictures of the boxes in his house, which, while it's a big pile of stuff, it's not as big as you might think 10,000 would be. But anyway, he joked about having the world's supply of DB19 connectors in his house and how he's thinking about filling his bathtub with them. But anyway, I included it here. It's a cool story on the one hand, and also because it's actually reminiscent of the story that Boise and Mike Rowan and I had with getting the cartridge cases made through the Chinese vendor. And, sometimes you just have to commit to a size and a big enough order to make something worthwhile for the manufacturer to manufacture them. And then you have to deal with the results. And in our case, it was Boise who got the big shipment. And then Mike and I got some partial shipments from there. And I think Boise still got a few more cases that are actually Mike's and mine, waiting for us to get them from him. Anyway, I thought it was a cool story. I hope you'll enjoy it too. What do you think, Neil? What should we get produced next?
I thought of something actually, and I'm not just making this up, but I can't remember now.
Maybe DIN 6 connectors?
There was something. You know what? That was it. Actually, yes. You're absolutely right. I was thinking it this afternoon. If we can get somebody to pre-make DIN cables.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent.
That might be cool. I don't know how many they'd have to be worthwhile.
You think we could sell enough joystick adapters?
I hope we could. I don't know. Maybe we have to make some light pin adapters or something to go with it. Something else that uses a lot of DIN cables.
Do some custom joysticks and yeah.
Moving on, another news item. It's not strictly CoCo related, but I suspect a lot of people will be interested to hear. On eBay, there was someone sold an original Apple I computer. Now, if you're not aware of so the Apple II was not the first computer made by Apple. If you thought it was, maybe you should refer back to the name Apple II. The original Apple I was a single board computer, and they made a limited number of them. I'm sure somebody knows the exact number. I don't. And of those, because they were originally had a sort of a buyback program where you could trade in your Apple I for your Apple II, or a discount on an Apple II. And just because of, they were produced 40 years ago, there's not a lot of them left known to survive. And I think it's, a few dozen in the world. So this one went on sale. And rather than being sold at auction like at Sotheby's or some other big auction house, this one was just sold on eBay. And so everybody got to see it. Long story short, the Apple I computer sold for $60,300 US, which I think is not as high as some others have sold. So the seller may have hurt themselves by not using a big time auction house. But anyway, it's kind of a cool thing. What in the Tandy world would sell for that? A green thumb. If we actually had a Project Green Thumb prototype or something out there, or
Ag Vision.
The Ag Vision terminal. I don't know if they'd sell for that much, but I'd sure like to see.
Yeah.
I'd like to bid on an Ag Vision. That's for sure. I'd love to bid on a Green Thumb.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I would embarrass myself bidding on them, but if you've got one for sale, feel free to contact me privately and let me see if I can cheat you out of it.
Or a generous donation.
A generous donation. That'd be a lovely way to help us pay the costs associated with the CoCo Crew podcast. All right. Well, anyway, moving on. The next two items actually come from Per Surratt. He's a Dragon fellow. I think he's in Spain working on the Dragon, the cousin or clone of the CoCo, or it's really a cousin of the CoCo. They're both clones of a Motorola design from the SAM datasheet. His first one is an announcement of the, DOS Plus 5.0 extender now creates true VDK files. Now let me see if I can translate that for the CoCo users. So just like we had, disk extended color basic, and then we had JDOS and ADOS and RGB DOS that turned into HDB DOS or whatever. There were some variants on the DOSes for the CoCos. Well, there were also variances. There were also variances on DOSes for the Dragon, and I guess at least one of them was called DOS Plus, and at some point it really reached 5.0, and then I guess the DOS 5.0 extender, I guess, is for use with the CoCo SDC, and I guess So now, what is a VDK file? Well, a VDK file is a lot like a DSK file in some ways, but it's a different format, I guess. Must be. And so what he's announcing is that if you're using this DOS Plus 5.0 extender to have a Dragon DOS style of program running on your CoCo SDC, and you want to create VDK files for disk images, now that appears to be working better, or working properly now. So thanks, Per, for sharing that. Thanks for doing it. Hopefully I haven't mangled the description too much. These new segments do start to get a bit long. What do you think, Neil? You going to whip out the DOS Plus 5.0 extender for your Dragon running a CoCo SDC?
Well, I've always wanted to run the CoCo SDC on a Dragon, so it's a high possibility.
All right.
Now, do you know offhand, does the Dragon support DSK files?
I don't know. Obviously it's not the Dragon itself as accessing the disk image files. It's whatever's presenting them to them. I don't know if you can use a DSK file through the CoCo SDC on a Dragon.
Maybe this is the format they're using.
Yeah, well, so the VDK is what they've used for emulators. I don't know exactly what the differences are, but a DSK file is basically just a pile of sector images.
Yeah.
I think the VDK file may be that plus a little header of some sort to tell you how many sectors or something like that. The next item also is from Per. He's announcing where they've got the Orchestra 90 converted to work on the Dragon 64. The original Orchestra 90 ROM is kind of tied to the CoCo and how it works. And even though they're similar, the CoCo and Dragon are similar, they vary, of course, where the keyboard is the rows on the keyboard are a bit different. And I guess the Orchestra 90 actually can drive the disk image as well, or the disk drive as well. And the disk controller on the Dragon is different from the disk controller on the CoCo. Not just the ROMs are different, but the actual hardware works slightly differently. Now I have a Dragon 64 version of the Orchestra 90 cartridge code, and I guess it will work to put output through the DAC, the 6-bit DAC on the Dragon, and of course now it looks like it'll access the disk as well. Pretty cool, huh?
That is cool. I've been following that project for a while.
Next one is a self-serving announcement from me. I've kind of been promising for a while to do a write-up on the mechanics of the Sega Genesis joypad adapter for the CoCo 3 that I designed the circuit for and that Neil produced and has been selling. And so I've written up a blog post on my Retro Tinker blog site for that, and it explains in some detail not only how the direction conversions are done, but also how to access the extra joystick buttons. So I thought it was a pretty good write-up. No, did you read it, Neil?
It's a great write-up, and it's also helped me as well because I frequently get emails asking, how does this thing work? Well, now I just point people to your blog.
Cool. Very good.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one strays back away from the CoCo a little bit, but I guess it'll be all right. Author's a Tom Halwerda over on the OS News site. So the title, USB-C and Lightning headphones aren't great news for everyone. So I don't know if you've heard, there's going to be yet another new connector for use with USB devices. And I guess part of it is enabling higher speed accesses and such. And that's great. Sounds like some of the new cell phones are going to come out and use that not only for charging, and I'm sure, of course, for loading files and such onto the devices, but it sounds like they're also going to use them in place of the standard 3.5 millimeter headphone jack that we're all quite used to. This is where the electronics engineers of the world have become obsessed with making things smaller and smaller, and now apparently a headphone jack is just way too big.
Yeah.
for comfort, I guess. I don't know. And along with that, of course, is I guess with the USB-C connector for your headphone, you can enforce some kind of digital rights management, I guess. I don't know. The main point of why is this interesting from a retro standpoint? So I know I've definitely seen other people have taken WAV files that represent what would otherwise be on a cassette tape, and you can load them on your cell phone, and then you can plug the cable that would have gone into your cassette player and plug that into the headphone jack of your cell phone, and then you can load programs onto your retro computers through your cell phone. And so if your cell phone no longer has a headphone jack, you're not going to be able to do that. Now, I suspect that there will be adapters that give you back a headphone jack so that people can use their Beats by Dre or whatever on their new cell phones. But, even those might not be available forever. I don't know. I hope this is not a new trend. I kind of just like the old headphone jack. It's good enough for what it does. It's hard to see why we would want a new jack there. But, I don't know. I also did not immediately embrace the HDMI video port on all the new televisions. And then eventually it kind of reached a point where it's like, oh, you know what? That is kind of cool. Audio and video on the same plug, yada, yada, yada. So maybe there's something here that I'm just not seeing yet, but I will miss the ability to load programs on my retro computers. I'll have to stack up on the best portable MP3 players I can find that still has a headphone. Something.
Yet again, it's just the nice simplicity of an analog jack.
So it can be pretty cool, but I don't know, something to watch out for, I guess is what it comes down to. If you're the kind of person that has to have the brand new cell phone every 6 months or whatever, you may want to watch out for that if you're a retro computing person as well. All right. So the next item comes to us through the Vintage is the New Old Vintage is the New Old website. Paulo Garcia. I'm not sure where he dug up this. I guess it says it's an article that comes out of the 80 Micro magazine from 1987, and he's gotten permission from the author Ron White to repost it. Anyway, the title of the story is The Tandy Story 10 Years After the TRS-80 Model 1. And so it's a reflection on the beginnings of Tandy and how they ended up getting in the electronics market and on through how they began building computers and all that sort of stuff. It's pretty interesting, if you're into reading historical accounts of that sort of thing. There's one other thing that I thought was interesting in this article. For whatever reason, and I think it's alluded to in Bill and Boise's book, CoCo, Tandy's underdog computer. What's it called? I like to mess with Boise on that one. Underdog. What's it? The Colorful History of Tandy's Underdog Computer.
You're going to have to keep that book in front of you.
I ought to. Anyway, I think it's mentioned in their book, and I definitely have heard Boise say that it's a little hard to pin down actual sales numbers for the CoCo, and I've heard. I think I've heard some other Tandy people say about some other Tandy machines that it's hard to get the numbers on. It's like there's some kind of gentleman's agreement back in the past that they weren't going to ever talk about the numbers. I don't know what this point of that was and why such an agreement needs to live on 40 or 50 years later or whatever. But anyway, they're still pretty tight-lipped about any kind of specific numbers. Well, this one doesn't have specific numbers really at all, and certainly not about the CoCo, but there were a few numbers thrown out here and there that might help to pin down some sales. There's like how much sales they had in a certain year and how much of those were computer sales and whatever. And maybe some people can sleuth those numbers out with the notion that, well, in this year they could have only been selling this models of computers or whatever. I don't know, but there are some numbers in there. Maybe you can make some sense out of them. Maybe not, but hey, check out the article. It's a good read anyway. All right. Getting closer to the end. Here we've got a little article from Chris Osborne. It says, doing Linux sysadmin tasks from your 8-bitter. Let's see. Basically, he goes through and talks about how to use a program called TCP-Sir, which is a program that monitors. It runs on like a Linux box and or other kind of Unix-ish box, and monitors a serial port for what would otherwise appear to be a modem dialing information, except instead of ATDT 351-2431, you say ATDT localhost or ATDT, IP address. It will make a TCP connection and then feed it back through your serial port. And so he documents how to do that to then be able to telnet out from your CoCo to a Linux box on a local network.
That's cool.
It's kind of cool. I definitely advise you to make sure you are on an isolated local network, because Telnet is, of course, not at all secure. But it's kind of cool. Shows a green CoCo screen here where he's seems to be logged in and looks like he's installing software or something like that. But anyway, kind of a cool thing. If that floats your boat, then definitely look into it, and maybe you too can use your CoCo as an admin terminal for the machines on your network. Pretty cool. What do you think, Neil?
Definitely. You're a Linux guy. I'm surprised you haven't done that.
No, I don't enjoy using a 32-column screen for that sort of thing. I probably have done some similar stuff in the far past, but not recently enough to matter. All right. Well, moving on. This one I'm just listing as eBay is the news item. Or the provider of the news. So TRS-80 color computer DICOM light gun interface for sale.
Oh, yes.
And this is it caused a little bit of a discussion on the mailing list. I think there were a number of people who just simply weren't familiar with the item. A lot of people at first seemed a little skeptical that it would be worth much, but it's got about an hour left to go on the auction, so if you're listening, you probably can't bid on it. But it's right now. The price of the current bids is $78. So for those that didn't know about this item, this is kind of a rare item in the CoCo world, and it enables the use of a Sega style light gun phaser, like what came with the Sega Master System. For a couple of games that run on a CoCo 3. And that would be Iron Forest. And what's the other one?
Medieval Madness.
Medieval Madness. And didn't you review those in an earlier episode?
I did. There was also a third game, but it never came out. It's based on a Western theme.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, we should make that. That'd be cool.
That would be.
Well, anyway, so it's a cool item. I was a little surprised at some of the skepticism that showed up in that thread, but I think people just generally didn't know what it was. Might inspire a reproduction, possibly from Ed Snyder. We'll see if that pans out or not. This is, as was pointed out on that thread, the light guns do only work with CRT style monitors, which is it's more to do with the way the LCD and similar monitors, the way they process images, than anything else. But anyway, no matter why, the fact is that it's not going to work except with a CRT style monitor. CRT style monitors are not that hard to find. At least I know when I go out to the thrift shops or whatever, you can still find them. Rather nice old TVs for next to nothing. So don't be afraid of that. You can get one. You'll have to find a place for it, of course, and then you break your back carrying it inside. But it's kind of worth it.
And stick to 24-inch or under. Should be safe.
Yeah. So are you into the CRT monitors as well, Neil?
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's Neil. He likes the monitors. He likes the floppy drives.
The only problem is they take a lot of room.
Pretty sure he's got a dot matrix printer hooked up somewhere in this house too.
Yeah, actually I do.
Yeah, no surprise, right? All right. Okay, getting close. All right, so this item, the news is actually posted by John Ferguson, but since it's about a program that's, I think is from Steve Bamford, I've listed him as the person for the news item. Anyway, it's a new game, looks like, for the Dragon, which should hopefully also run on CoCo 1 or 2, or at least if somebody give it a little love, it will. So Steve was the author of Flag and Bird, which is the Flappy Bird style clone. This one is being called Kong Island. It's got a picture of the title screen up that has, I'm guessing, kanji Japanese characters. I don't know. They're definitely not English. Does say push start. Anyway, it looks like a little platform style game. We got a character that kind of looks sort of Mario-ish, walking along the platforms. I don't really see him jumping, but it looks like the kind of game where you probably run and jump and that sort of stuff. So I don't know. Looks pretty cool. Definitely eager to see what comes of it. He does have some sort of preview available through a Dropbox link to a RAR file, which I don't know. I'm not sure why Windows people like RAR files. I don't know much about them, but
I actually am not really a fan of RAR myself.
Yeah, well, some people seem to like them. It's not an insurmountable challenge to open them, so beggars can't be choosers, I guess, right? But
Yep.
Anyway, there it is. Go take a look. Looks like a fun game might be coming our way. All right, well, to our final news item. It was a couple of weeks ago now. We got this little item on the news list. Pops up from Brett Gordon, and it says, so the title is IP Packets on My CoCo. So what? So Brett, of course, is working on Fuzix or Fuzix, however you want to pronounce it. So a Unix-like operating system kernel being ported to a number of retro computers, including, of course, the CoCo 3. There's a CoCo 2 port underway with the assistance of a RAM card. So Brett's been working on that, and I guess he put together some code and a TCP stack called Micro IP from Adam Dunkel's. Got it compiling and hooked it up to where he was able to get a ping flowing across a CoCo or through CoCo's one end of a ping. Ping, of course, is a network utility used in IP networking. Many people will have experienced it at one time or another. It's usually used when you're at the why in the world can't I reach that other computer?
Yeah.
Of debugging a connection, you ping it and see what comes back. So it's a very simple program, but if you can ping, then generally you can have any number of other kind of connections. So very exciting news, a long way away from anything actually useful, but it did spark a discussion of, what kind of hardware could we build? You want to expand out to using Ethernet hardware. Then the discussion of, well, what about, instead of dumb old Ethernet, what about something smarter that can offload the IP stack for you? What about something that uses a wireless LAN connection instead of Ethernet? Yada, yada, yada. Lots of discussion. It's kind of cool because this is sort of in my wheelhouse in terms of that's sort of what I do for a day job. So I don't know. We'll see. It looks like Jim Brain might have sent off for some prototype Ethernet cartridges. Hopefully I'll be able to get one. Jim, if you're listening. be happy to evaluate that for you. Let's put it that way. Pretty exciting stuff. I don't know. I think, of course, the usefulness of having an IP stack on a CoCo is probably debatable, but it can be a nice way to transfer files if nothing else, and might be a nice gateway to having some internet scale multiplayer games on the CoCo.
Could also maybe work for IRC.
Sure, you could do IRC or a number of other things like that. So pretty cool. Maybe you could run an NTP client to make sure the real-time clock in your CoCo is always up to date. Hey, stranger things have happened. So anyway, pretty cool stuff. Congratulations, Brett. Thanks for proving it's possible. A lot of people said, the CoCo can't possibly do networking, whatever. And it's like, well, that's kind of silly, because there were certainly contemporary machines that weren't that much more powerful doing it back in the day, and certainly the Commodore 64 and the Atari 8-bits have been able to do it. There's no reason why a CoCo can't do it. So I hope to see more on this front.
It's like a challenge, when someone says you can't do it, got to prove it.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our news segment. So I'm going to need to take a little break, stretch my jaws, then we'll be back with some feedback.
After these messages,
we'll be right back.
So we do have feedback from a trio of folks this time. First one, I guess, comes from our good friend Mike Rowan. Mike was kind of commiserating with us over the CoCo Fest blues. We kind of get the little postpartum thing. Once CoCo Fest is over, you're kind of depressed. You got to wait another year to go back, that sort of thing. But he said we helped him get back in the spirit of things, I guess. He says he listened to the podcast while reorganizing his CoCo stuff. So that's cool. Glad to be able to help you get moving again.
That's a great time to listen to our show.
Yeah.
Organizing CoCo stuff.
Fiddling with your CoCo stuff. Yeah.
Doesn't get any better than that.
No, it's a pretty good way to pass the time, I think. Moving on, the next one's from Steve Bamford. We just mentioned Steve in the news segment about his Kong Island program, and of course he had the Flag and Bird game as well. So he says, I especially enjoyed Tim Lindner's inventive speech sound pack segment. So if you remember last month, we had a guest tech segment from Tim Lindner, where he expanded on the speech sound pack a bit, and he may need to get his speech sound pack adjusted a bit. It seemed like it was a little mouthy. But anyway, so that was cool. Yeah, it was nice to have a guest contribution. If anyone else would like to make a contribution, including you, Steve, it could even be a contribution based on your own projects. I think that'd be cool. All right, and then the final one comes from someone new to me. And so new that I have no idea how to pronounce this person's name, so hopefully I won't mess it up too bad. But it's Mahlon, first name, so Mahlon, and then the last name Garis, so Garis or Gary, so Mahlon Gary or Mahlon Garis. I'm not really sure. Feel free to send some more feedback correcting me on my mispronunciation. Anyway, so he writes. Are there any plug-and-play printers for the color computer that we can readily get supplies for? So I sent him an answer back and saying, well, sort of. The TP10 is kind of available. Not hard to find one, and there are sources of paper available. But basically, I referred him back to episode 9, which I think is our most fruitful host discussion, was talking about the what do you do with printers? And it seems like that one just keeps coming back. People finding reasons to use their printers, or us finding interesting printer topics or whatever. But
I think that led to getting a plotter too.
Yeah, plotters. Yeah, well, I've got those to write about too. Anyway, so that was episode 9. You may want to reflect or refer back to episode 9 for our printer discussion. Hopefully you'll enjoy that. But thanks for the feedback. I think that's all the feedback we've got. If you're listening and dying just to tell us how we messed something up or forgotten to include something, or if you just want to tell us how great we did on something, all of those types of things are welcome. And please just go ahead and send them to feedback@cococrew.org, and we'll be happy to respond, probably include them on the podcast as appropriate.
Hey, John and Neil, this is Boise Pete with Cloud9. I just wanted to say congratulations on the CoCo Podcast, something that we've been looking forward to in the community for a long time, and something that's long overdue for the color computer. Oh, and by the way, have you got your CoCo 3 yet?
All right. So this episode, we have kind of a new feature for us. We did an interview before with John Strong, pretty well received, but we just haven't quite gotten into the groove of doing interviews. But we're hoping to maybe have a few more over the coming year. But so anyway, we've reached out and tried to find somebody interesting to interview, and it's a little bit difficult with Steve Strobridge is kind of talking to everyone and getting them on his YouTube channel. So rather than to saturate you with people that are already talking on the airwaves, the internet waves or whatever, we thought we'd try to see if we could find someone else that might be interesting to talk to. And anyway, it turned out I had a kind of a second order connection to a fellow who played a role, or who's a founder of the online service known as Delphi. And Delphi was particularly popular with a big chunk of the CoCo community. And as we'll discuss in the interview, part of that, I guess, turned out to be because in the early days of Delphi, which was originally the Kuzma Encyclopedia, that one of the options for membership included getting a color computer set up as part of your membership. So I guess that explains the affinity of CoCo users for Delphi. Anyway, so we're going to interview Wes Kuzma. Wes is a very friendly fellow, and he has a very interesting story to tell, including both some of the early history at Delphi, and he goes on to talk some about some more modern topics of related to security on the internet and people proving who they are and other cool stuff like that. You have anything to add, Neil?
No, I think it's great.
So here's our interview with Wes Kuzma. All right, welcome back, listeners, to the CoCo Crew Podcast. This is John Linville, and Neil is with us. Say hello, Neil.
Hello.
And we're joined by Wes Kuzma. Is that the correct pronunciation, Kuzma?
That actually is closer to the true German pronunciation than our family actually uses. So, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds, well, like you say, close enough. And Wes is a real pioneer of the online world, even before the internet, and then actually is one of the people who kind of helped with the early popularization of the internet through his online company Delphi. Or is that how you pronounced it, Delphi or Delphi?
Delphi, we pronounced it, yeah.
Okay, Delphi. A lot of people are familiar with Delphi in the CoCo community. If you look, there's still Delphi forums on the web. There's even a header that says the Color Computer OS 9 Delphi forum is the oldest forum on Delphi, Delphi's longest running forum. And I had always known that that there was a strong connection with the Color Computer, and I never really put a lot of thought into it. But I was reading a book last summer. The book is actually an Apple II book. I'll go ahead and plug that. It's by Steve Wyrick. It's called Sophistication and Simplicity, The Life and Times of the Apple II Computer. And in that book, there's a chapter on online services, and there's a reference there to the Kussmaul Encyclopedia and how there were a couple of options for account holders there that would include along with the account, an entire computer system, which was kind of an important marketing thing back in the day, I think, because not everybody had computers. And one of the options was for an Apple II, which is why it was in that book, but the other option was for the Tandy color computer. And so I thought that was neat. And I Googled around, and it turned out that Wes and I have a common friend, or a friend in common, shall we say, rather than a common friend, just a plain old person. So I reached out. Wes was kind enough to agree to an interview. So with that kind of long-winded introduction, Wes, what else would you like to say about yourself? And we can carry it from wherever you like. Certainly our listeners are going to be interested in the early days in history of Retro Angle, if you'd like to start there, or just tell us about yourself maybe, and maybe the early days of the encyclopedia.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me. Delighted to do this podcast with you. Not many people have dug up the Kussmaul Encyclopedia, the world's first computerized encyclopedia. And indeed, it was a complete home computer system with access to a variety of online services, including our own Kussmaul Encyclopedia database. And indeed, you had your choice of an Apple II or a Tandy color computer. That business model lasted about a year. The business model meaning supplying computer, online service, software, and support for about the price of an Encyclopedia Britannica, and positioning it as an encyclopedia. I say it lasted about a year because it turned out that our cost of product was about 4 times what we were charging for it. So it was a totally unviable business model. So
sounds like a .com business model from 20 years later.
I think we were the inspiration for what was the one with the sock puppet?
Pets.com.
Pet food.
Yeah. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, no, that was a financial disaster, and as soon as we bailed out of that, venture capitalists started getting interested, but they immediately saw our problem before we did dump the hardware part of it.
Sure.
So it became Delphi. That was February, as I recall. We changed the name, or the new name became effective February 15th of 1982, I believe. So it was actually less than a year that we were selling hardware.
Yeah. Now, so is that the kind of the typical a bunch of geeks decided to start a company and didn't really know much about business, or was it more?
Pretty much. I was a geek by disposition, but professionally I was a sales rep for Tektronix. Going back even earlier, 1980, I was selling the Tektronix 4014 and, basically Tektronix digital products, not the oscilloscopes, etc. Graphics terminals, graphic computers, desktop graphic computers, and had made some money in the stock market and knew that I wanted to do my own thing. And I had 2 ideas in mind. One was basically a CAD system based upon the Tektronix 4014 desktop computer. And the other was this encyclopedia idea. And I kept, boring my girlfriend with my ruminations about what I should do. Should I do the CAD system or should I do the encyclopedia?
Okay.
And finally she said, "Look, enough. I don't know what that CAD system is. Sounds, sounds like maybe a good idea. Of course, that would have turned into AutoCAD.
Right.
But that encyclopedia sounds like fun, so you should do the encyclopedia, okay?" And end of discussion. And I said, you're right. The encyclopedia is more fun,
And sometimes doing the idea that everyone understands, I guess, makes a little more sense than digging too deep into the unknown.
Well, the thing is, though, if this is the essence of marketing, though, is there are familiar markets and there are defined markets. Everybody can understand most people can understand a consumer appeal.
Right.
Something that is for all of us. But if you're a mechanical engineer, that's a very small subset of the population. But you know what CAD is, in those days. So, it's understandable to that select market. And oh, by the way, reaching a tiny defined market can be less risky than trying to reach everybody.
Yeah, that's true. The bigger piece of a smaller pie sometimes is kind of the idea.
Right.
Well, so in some of the lore or whatever I can read on the internet or about the story, there's some talk that your son had some kind of research project and you were dissatisfied with the available resources, and so then your response was to go off and buy an encyclopedia.
Well,
is that sort of vaguely right?
Yeah, that's true. One of the impetuses was my daughter's actually
okay.
project, but
it's a really interesting. Not just everybody would have that take on it. No.
So, but there is a great. Speaking of acquiring an encyclopedia, the text for the Kussmaul Encyclopedia came from a few sources, but mostly it was an encyclopedia, a print encyclopedia, the Cadillac Modern Encyclopedia, published out of St. Louis.
Yeah.
By a gentleman named Max Shapiro. Max was in his 80s and really didn't have the stamina to keep at his project. So came along and said, your encyclopedia can now join the digital age, and I'd like to license your text for an online encyclopedia. And his response was, well, that's interesting, but I got to tell you, I don't think it'll work. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, computers can only handle numbers. They don't do letters, so you can't really put an alphabetically defined information product into a computer. So I said, Max, I think we've actually gotten over that hurdle. Let me worry about that, okay? Just give me the text.
Well, that's cool.
And we scanned it. It didn't exist in digital form anywhere, so we scanned it using the Kurzweil device. Kurzweil had a machine for reading to the blind back in this was late 1980. So isn't that remarkable? Although I have to say there was so many, came up with so many typos, it probably would have been just as effective to have someone type in the whole thing.
Well, that's pretty cool. So you had you picked up a text encyclopedia, and you had a device intended for reading to the blind,
right.
And you used that to actually perform the transcription of the text into a computer form. So that's pretty cool. I would not have thought of that. I guess I would have Well, I'm not sure I would have thought of it at all, but I might would have imagined an office full of interns typing in articles or something like that. So a lot of encyclopedias have pictures. What did you do about the picture, graphical kind of information?
Yeah, I explained to Neil that we just put a tag in wherever there was supposed to be an image, just letting the reader know there would be an image if this were 15 years later. 15 years from now, you'll be looking at images here.
That's cool.
But, as I mentioned to Neil, I mean, our highest speed when we launched was 300 baud. So 300 bits per second. So
at 300 baud, it's hard enough to even get the text down.
Yeah, I mean, it would
hard enough to get the text.
Horribly slow to provide images. What we did do though is we integrated newswire content with encyclopedia entries. So, for instance, if you looked up Germany, for instance, you would get at the end of the article, or within, let's say, the paragraph about climate, there would be today's weather in German cities. On the paragraph about finance, you'd see today's exchange rate for the Deutschmark, and we thought that was pretty cool. Maybe even made up for a lack of pictures. Fun story about getting that newswire content. The supplier was UPI, which I believe still exists, but it's pretty small. AP has pretty much taken over, and AFP. But we had gone to UPI to get service, and they dragged their feet and finally said, "No, we don't want to do it." Why not? Well, just we don't want to do it. And we pushed them, and finally they said, "Look, there's a guy in Maine that started reselling our content to all these little newspapers around the state that couldn't afford a UPI wire on their own or didn't want to pay for their own UPI wire using digital technology like you're using." So I explained what we're up to and that we're not a news service organization, and they still didn't want to do it. So I started sounding like a lawyer and saying, well, this constitutes restraint of trade. You can't deny supplying a service that you supply to the rest of the market just for arbitrary reasons. So, in fact, we called up Lawrence Tribe about this. He's a famous.
That's the big guns.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not like he took the case, but he actually talked to us about it. He's claimed he was considering it. But I guess the fact that we had taken that step was enough to get UPI to say, all right, we don't want to end up with a legal case on our hands. So here you go. Here's the service. They gave us this old, big, clunky, tube-powered receiver, and the input line to it, but it was encrypted, and they didn't give us the decryption key. It's like, it was this 5-bit Bordeaux code. Actually, not encrypted. It was just encoded in this unknown encoding scheme. And he said, well, where's the table? We don't have to give you that. So we had to do a little bit of cryptography and decipher this 5-bit Bordeaux code, which was fun. Took us about a day. What we did was we looked at newspaper stories that had come over the wire, or newspaper stories that the newspaper had gotten from UPI, and looked at names in the stories and looked for character strings that resembled, in spacing, the character strings that we saw in the newspaper, and guessed, for instance, that who was the president then? Was it Reagan?
Reagan.
Yeah. So we'd look for REAGAN in a story, next to words of the same length as the words we saw on the wire, and it was a lot of fun.
That's some Bletchley Park kind of stuff right there.
Right. Not quite, but just as much fun.
That's cool. So did you continue to offer the printed encyclopedia during this time, or was that completely discontinued?
We never did the print encyclopedia.
Okay, well, so you just picked it up. You picked up the rights to it, but you never offered it as a printed product.
Right. No, that was Cadillac Publishing Company. That was the print product was theirs.
Okay, cool. So Neil and I were noticing, there was a significant difference in the offering price between the CoCo version and the Apple II version of the original Kuzma Encyclopedia. We were wondering, was that just a reflection on the retail price of the hardware, or was there a difference in the access levels?
No, just the difference in the hardware price.
Okay.
CoCo was $400, and we had made arrangements to buy it at dealer price. Although we didn't realize, being naive about business, that they had given us the deal without being explicit about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't realize that we had the deal. So I continued to shop around for the CoCo at reseller pricing, and you can imagine down at Tandy, they're rolling their eyes and saying, it's like, forget it. I'm selling this stupid thing, for crying out loud.
Oh, that's funny. Well, so I was wondering too, so Tandy had a product at about the same time that was a video text terminal, very similar to the CoCo, but it was purely a terminal kind of operation. Were you aware of that one, and did you consider that at all?
We were aware of it. We considered it, but we were at the point where, it didn't take us long to realize that being in the hardware business was just, not going to work for us.
Right.
So, because, support, right? Even if it's just a dumb terminal, people are going to have trouble. We're talking 1981 now,
Sure.
Yeah. And, and acoustic couplers and RS-232 connectors and people had a lot of trouble, and they required a significant amount of phone time getting them straightened out. And that just, in an instant, ate up all our profit potential. We're losing from every one we sold was a losing proposition. So, yeah, we looked at the terminal and said, no, let's, we're out of the hardware business anyway.
So how big a team did you have?
Well, there were about half a dozen of us, not all full time.
Yeah, and were these people you'd known from previous jobs, or did you recruit them specifically to work on the encyclopedia? Or
yeah, some of them were. Some of them were. We were on the in a shared office with a company called Cybermation.
Okay.
And the Cybermation and we shared people, so the two of us together made up a full-time job for some people.
Right. So almost like on Silicon Valley, the TV show.
Right. Yeah, I love that show.
Oh, man. Well, that's cool.
I think it's impressive that half a dozen of you pulled all that off, including the tech support.
Yeah, well, I don't know that we pulled it off. Did we have a successful product? Yes, you could tap into the encyclopedia. Oh, I should give Phil McNeil some credit there. He was the one who I wrote the original text retrieval program, and it was bad. It was bad. It just was slow and didn't work half the time. I had a friend at the MIT Joint Computer Facility. His name was Phil McNeil. He's a doctor in California now, I believe. But Phil had a brainstorm. He said, if we just give every encyclopedia entry, make each one a file. Actually, I had that, but name the file. Use the name of the file in the text in the print command. Only it wasn't print. We were using VAX VMS. It was basically display this file, and that's all there was to it. Someone at the prompt would say, look up, Afghanistan. Well, the VMS lookup command, I guess, was it. Or no, it wasn't lookup we translated that. That was, obviously trivial. And then it would just say, print this file, display this file. And
so you're actually making good use of the operating system.
yeah, I mean, it was just there. That's all there was to it. After all of my complex, convoluted code, Phil came up with this idea, and it worked beautifully. We also ran the text through this program that searched for names of other entries in the encyclopedia and tacked on cross-references at the bottom. And that that was quite fun and quite habit-forming to have all these cross-references. So at the end of the story on Afghanistan, you would have, cross-reference to, Central Asia, and maybe one of the names of some of the tribes or something like that, and they'd all be at the bottom. You just, not click. They weren't clicking. You didn't click in those days, but you identify the name of the cross-reference, and it'd be right there. So
sure. Early
hypertext. Early hypertext.
Early hypertext browsing. So that's cool. So the term I was trying to think of earlier was incubator.
Right. Yeah, we had a sort of a de facto incubator. We didn't think of it as an incubator. Bill Belanger was CEO of Cybermation, and he and I just sort of shared people.
Sure. Well, that's cool. Well, so you said you're operating as the encyclopedia for a year or so, and then you changed names to Delphi. Did you get did you grow bigger in terms of staff and office and all that about the same time, or?
We stayed pretty small. We brought in '83. We brought in Dan Bruns, Kip Bryan, and Glenn McIntyre. Actually, Glenn McIntyre had worked with Dan and Kip at a bank, at Bay Bank in Massachusetts, and said these guys would be great additions to the team, and they were. So we got, our team grew in experience, acquired people with more real-world IT experience in '83. Like I mentioned, I was a hobbyist.
Right.
My day job involved selling the stuff, but my experience programming and stuff was after the
right. So you had to bring in the professionals for the scale out kind of operation.
Yeah. And we changed the name to Delphi. A couple of things allowed us to really gain traction and take off. One was that we learned that the hobbyist magazines were our natural marketing partners.
Sure. Atari
magazine, CoCo. Hot CoCo was a color computer magazine.
Yep.
And it's funny, this relationship between broadcast and print media on the one hand and social media on the other. There's still the same tension going on, and it's just unbelievable. We didn't realize that we were taking advantage of these magazines, offering them the chance to join the information age, the digital world, blah, 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 what they got from the deal by actively promoting their SIG on Delphi. What were they getting? They were doing our marketing both to advertisers and subscribers for us. And what were they getting? They were getting a SIG on Delphi, and thinking that, of course these are CoCo people. They're gonna hang out in CoCo. They're our people. They're not gonna go wandering around the rest of Delphi. Well, of course they did. People have diverse interests, not just they're interested in things other than their color computer.
Sure.
And so their level of promotion would drop off. They wouldn't, instead of linking every article and putting a tag on every ad, devoting a full page to it, devoting some cover space, the promotion would drop off because they started saying, hey, what's in it for us, What's in it for us, the publisher, and indeed, it's like, it's like this word technology gets people so hung up. Because if you think about it, when it comes to a print magazine, there's a lot of technology involved.
Sure.
A lot of technology involved in getting ink onto paper, getting the content together, and it's not as though the publisher is intimidated by that technology. Publisher understands that technology is at my service. I decide the cover price. I decide my ad rates. I decide the subscription rates. That's my business, right? But when it comes to the online world, it's like, oh, let me sit at the feet of the master here, the guru who understands this new thing. And we really didn't think about that. We really didn't think about the fact that later on we came out with this product called GroupLink, where a magazine publisher could run their own online service. And remarkably, they didn't. We started selling group links, and then after I kind of got, in 1987, I was pushed upstairs. I became like chairman. I was chairman, but not involved day to day, and I launched a spin-off that was financed by the same VC, and we went off trying to sell group links, which we did, but we tended to sell them to Digital Equipment Corporation and technology companies.
Right.
And it's like, well, the idea is we're giving the audience aggregator the opportunity to own your audience as you do. You own your audience and advertiser relationships as you do with your print product. We did one of these for National Review magazine. They had a publisher, Wick Allison, who was not of the mold of most magazine publishers. And I remember doing our presentation to the staff at National Review and having their CFO take me aside afterwards. And in presentation, I said, look, here's what it is. It's an expo and conference on your readers and advertisers' desktop. It's no more complicated than that. That's all it is. It's a place where your readers and advertisers can get together. And so don't be scared of it, just because it's online, it's like an expo and conference that runs 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. It's always there. And it's a good business opportunity. Anyway, their CFO, Jim Kilbridge, took me aside afterwards and said, Wes, that was a good presentation, thank you. We got it. Trade show and conference on your readers and advertisers' desktop. Good metaphor. Got it. But I should let you know something, that magazine people tend not to like trade shows and conferences.
Yeah.
And I was so blown away by that. I didn't stop it and say, Jim, why? It's good business. If you've managed to aggregate an audience that advertisers want to reach, that's the hard part. Now why not, do the easy part? This is just give them a place to get together. Plenty of conference management companies will do all the work for you. And that has remained the big bugaboo if you think about it, why does Rupert Murdoch not own Facebook? Why don't media companies who are the experts in audience aggregation and advertising, why is Google not, why didn't they launch Google, And I think the answer is the same as, well, why didn't the railroads end up owning the airlines, they knew how to sell travel.
Yeah.
And
do what I guess.
I was turned on to another magazine by National Review, and I must have talked to that publisher over a period of a couple of months, for hours and hours and hours on the phone. And finally he says, Wes, it seems as though you're advocating letting our readers talk to each other and let them talk to our advertisers directly. I said, well, bingo. You got it. I'm not sure why it took this much time. He says, and I don't think we want to do that.
Right.
And it's like, okay, why not? But that's been the thing, that has been why broadcast and print media people have handed their livelihoods over to Google and Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that. And it's like, oh, all right.
Yeah, so I think this is a good transition to the more modern topics. So since we're on the topic here, like you say, they don't seem to want to own the business, but they certainly make a big use of it. You can't watch a news broadcast, especially a cable news broadcast, without seeing a dozen mentions of people's Twitter handles these days. Or, in fact, sometimes half the news is about what somebody did on Twitter. I wonder if you have a perspective on that. Is that?
I don't think I have a new perspective on it, other than to say it must really stick in their craw to have to do that. Hey, we had a relationship with Folio magazine. It was Hanson Publishing Company that was sold. I forgot who. Anyway, Folio is a magazine for magazine publishers. So, boy, that's our market, right?
That's meta.
I had a meeting arranged. I had worked out the deal with the publisher. I think I worked out with Joe Hansen himself. Anyway, won't name names, but I went down there to that meeting and was made. In fact, this happened a couple of times. In another magazine too, where I was left to cool my heels in the waiting room and pretended no such meeting was scheduled. In fact, the other one, I brought a guy up from Florida to be part of our presentation. He'd worked for us in Florida, and I flew him up to be part of a presentation. The publishing company in Manhattan, which will remain nameless, and we were left to cool our heels in the waiting room. And then, as we're waiting, because they're finishing up some other meeting, a guy shows up with, with lunch. People had ordered lunch in for exactly the group we were supposed to be meeting with, and the guy who came to meet him in the lobby made it clear that his people are going to have lunch now. We're going to sit down and have sandwiches. It was like, it's unbelievable the palpable hostility that some publishing people had toward us. Yeah. It's like, whatever. When I see what you're describing, half of a whole news segment, dealing with some Twitter exchange that's going on, and I'm thinking, guys, do you feel kind of like you missed the boat? But
well, yeah. Well, like you say, there's a lot more direct interaction on the internet these days, to the point where a lot of people decry, you get the trolls and the people responding in the comments on every article or whatever. A lot of that's blamed on humans' reaction to anonymity, or just the ability to hide behind a pseudonym or whatever. So, I think I've listened to some of your other interviews in the past, and you're talking about back in the days of Delphi, that even if somebody had a pseudonym, ultimately you knew who they were, what their credit card number was. If they really caused a problem, you could find them. That doesn't really exist today.
Well, we're trying to do something about that.
Yeah.
So here's the metaphor that I think you saw that thing. You probably saw this metaphor, but let me, for your listeners' benefit, the metaphor is your car's license plate. Mm-hmm. Anyone can see it. It makes you accountable for what your car does on public roadways. But no one gets to know the identity of the driver or owner of the vehicle unless there's been an accident or some other incident, in which case there becomes a legal need and right to know. The information does exist. It is available for disclosure, but only with need and right to know. Now, of course, the big question is, all right, who's the judge? Who manages that repository of identifying information? And the answer to that has to be well engineered and well considered. So we think we've done that. We think we've accomplished that. Your listeners may be familiar with PKI, which has traditionally stood for Public Key Infrastructure. We call it Puzzle Kit Infrastructure. Reasons I don't need to go into now. Bottom line, our central authority that makes such judgments takes the form of a municipality. A municipality, the city where you live, if it's like most cities in the world, is owned by you. Municipalities are owned by their residents, and they're typically governed by activist residents who show up for hearings and,
Sure.
The sewer commission, the zoning commission, the finance board, etc. There are a few people who have the time and interest to really get involved, and that's the model we use for the city of Osmio, which was the municipal charter for the city of Osmio was first decided at ITU headquarters, International Telecommunication Union headquarters in Geneva, March 7th, 2005. It's at osmio.ch, ch being the top-level domain for Switzerland. The idea is anyone who's interested can be involved in the governance of the certification authorities that Osmio is all about. So mapping your public key to your real name takes place by means of a CA. Your name does not appear in your identity certificate, unlike most X509 certificates where, identifying information is right there in the certificate so anyone can see it. Ours is structured a little differently. Your personal information is kept in a file called MOI, My Own Information, and all the relying party gets to see is that this identity certificate is currently valid, has not been revoked, has not been reported lost or stolen, and it has an identity quality. So here's the extent to which you can rely on this claim of identity. But nothing else is disclosed unless, A, either you prove to a court in Geneva that you've been slandered in public and you need to know who this person is who's saying untrue things about you or otherwise damaging you, or you go to the owner of that public key, we call it a PCN, personal certification number. You go to the owner and say, I'd like to know who you are. Please issue me a license to know your name, facial image, where you're located, whatever information you want to know about them, they have to issue you a license to know it. And that's how our system works.
Well, that's cool. So then people submit their own keys to this authority, or?
That's right. Generate your own key pair. Actually, you have a bunch of key pairs. You have a foundational key pair. As with real driver's licenses, they get lost, So the idea is you have a foundational key pair that's like your paper birth certificate, which you hardly ever use, but it's there in case you need to start over again, get a new driver's license or passport.
Right.
But otherwise, you keep it in a safe place. And then you have generated from that utility certificates. You can have one for digital signing. You can have one for authentication. You can have another one for key management, encryption key management. There's many utility certificates and their corresponding private keys, although we call the private key the PEN, Personal Endorsement Number. We've changed the names of everything in PKI because PKI nomenclature has such problems. So I forgot what the original question. Oh yeah, you generate those on your own device. The certification authority does not have access to your PENs, i.e. private keys. Only you have access to those.
You also said there was some level of qualitative information there. Is that akin to having people sign your keys, or is there something else that goes into that?
Well, you have, I mentioned identity quality. Our Identity Quality Assurance System, IDQA, rates the quality of your identity claim in 8 metrics, dimensions we call them, 8 dimensions of identity quality. One of them is called quality of other attestations. And so in there you would have a PGP attestation. You would say, I have this PGP key, and I can demonstrate that that goes with this key pair that Osmio has signed. Therefore, that adds to your identity quality. That's one. That's number four of 8 measures of identity quality. So yes, having other people sign your keys is one part of one of 8 measures of identity quality. I could bore your listeners by going through all 8, but probably that wouldn't be the best thing.
Yeah. So then it sounds like you have at least some interaction or overlay with sort of the traditional PKI. Are you trying to replace it, or are you trying to interoperate with it, or something else?
Replace.
Yeah.
Replace. No, I mean, technically, our CA runs on standard CA software, Osmio CA. Our certificates are technically X509 version 3 certificates. The only thing is, there's no information in them.
Mm-hmm.
So, distinguished name, for instance. What's the distinguished name? It doesn't have your name in it. So we have made use of established PKI technology, but we're deploying it in a novel way. In our system, for instance, there are no certificates that begin and end with a server or a site or an object. Everything identifies a human being. Human beings in charge of everything. So, for instance, when years from now, instead of having a quote-unquote site certificate, what does that mean? Who takes responsibility for it?
Right.
The site gets sold to a bunch of crooks. Do they maintain the certificate? Instead, every site would be digitally signed by the signing officer of the organization that owns the domain. So an identifiable human being says, I take responsibility for the content of this site. If we have a privacy statement and somehow the company fudges the privacy practices and doesn't conform to its own privacy statement, which of course happens all the time, here I am, blame me, I'm taking legal responsibility for that. You may be familiar with what happened to the auditing profession in the middle of the 20th century, beginning of the 20th century. This signature, the bottom of a bunch of statements, signature Arthur Anderson, meant that this dude, Arthur Anderson, takes responsibility for the accuracy of what's claimed in this balance sheet or income statement.
Sure.
And if there are problems with it, here I am. Here I am, Arthur Anderson. Here's my professional license, my auditing license. Here's my livelihood. If I have attested to a falsehood, I have to find a new line of work. That's the way it worked. And then around the middle of the century, it became Arthur Andersen LLP.
Right.
Bunch of guys collectively saying, yeah, Arthur Andersen, that's us. If there's a problem, well, we're not sure, So that's where it all started. That's where the BS started. That's that outlook on things. The idea that because we're now in a mass society, there's no such, you really can't practically have personal accountability, which was probably true in the middle of the century. But guess what? Now with PKI, with identity certificates, we can, there's that expression, the global village. The whole idea is in a village of 1,000 people, everybody knows everybody, and people are personally accountable. Global village of 7 billion people doesn't exist anymore. Wrong. We can have personal accountability in a global village of 7 billion people, and that's what we're all about.
Well, that's cool.
I have to say, I'm really enjoying this conversation here, because I deal pretty much on a daily basis with internet fraud. There's just so much of it, and this is great, Wes, that you guys are doing this.
Well, thank you. I have some videos and some books. My books are at pkipress.com.
We will get that in the show notes. We've got a couple of links already. What kind of uptake are you seeing, Wes? Is this something that's on the come, or is it still a ways off? Or
it's being slowly rolled out.
Yeah.
We're using a technique that we call Hatsopaloosahy, after a gentleman named George Hatsopoulos, and actually his brother also, John Hatsopoulos, who were very successful in doing what very few technology entrepreneurs have done before or since. And that is, they had a company, Thermo Electron, with a lot of bright engineers and a lot of intellectual property. And these bright engineers would, as they always do, come up with ideas for new applications, new markets, and almost always, or in every other instance, when an engineer brings up an idea to the big boss says, write it up. Well, I'll take a look at it, and it never goes anywhere from there. I shouldn't say never, but it's a very tricky situation. Either the CEO gets the business plan and says, that's a great idea. I really think you got something there, but we're stretched too thin as it is. We only have so many resources. Or he says, I'll tell you what, we're going to do a business unit. We're going to launch this as an enterprise, and here's where your new enterprise sits on the org chart. And oh, by the way, we'll give you a few options in the whole company, but you don't have a direct equity stake in what you're setting out to do, or any of a number of variations on that. And usually what happens is people get disgruntled. They may leave, start a new business, and of course they get sued because they're taking IP from their parent company, or this enterprise goes nowhere because of course they have to report up through layers of management before they can do anything. So here's what Hatsopoulos did. These guys come up with a business plan, and he'd say, all right, looks good to me. We're going to start a new business. It's going to be separately incorporated. The business plan, the business model is yours. You do as you see fit. You don't have to ask anybody's permission to do anything, except we're your board of directors, and we're going to hold you accountable for reaching your goals because, of course, we're your investors too. We're going to put up the resources to let you do this. And oh, by the way, if we end up competing with each other, we run into each other in the marketplace, may the best company win. So, well, that turned into, at one point, 25 separate publicly traded companies. Every single one of them was profitable. And then it got out of hand because Wall Street saw this as an IPO machine. They could generate. And George Hatsopoulos was getting elderly and kind of not able to rein in these Wall Street guys, and they took advantage of the notion and floated a lot of offerings for for companies that were invented on Wall Street, basically, instead of invented by the engineers. So it got a black eye, but if you look to the time before that, it was a phenomenally successful business model. So we are doing that with our quiet enjoyment infrastructure. We are recruiting entrepreneurs, licensees, to take our technology, our methods, our universal identity credential, and apply it to their market. We have one run by a wonderful young lady in Bucharest. It's called Authentimatch, and it is serving the sharing economy with measurably reliable identities, our Osmio VRD identity credential. So as you're probably aware, companies like Uber and Airbnb and Lyft and all these sharing economy companies, and a lot of tiny ones as well, they all have a common concern, and that is about identity. Because if you're going to share resources with somebody, you really want to know that that person is who they claim to be. So they spend a lot of money on vetting identity, and we are out there saying, look, you don't have to spend money on identity, invest money in identity. You become the source of the universal identity credential that they use not only on your site, but other places as well. And hey, there's a reason why Facebook and Twitter and Google and Microsoft and everybody wants to be the source of identity. It's good business. The difference is that they receive value from identity by invading your privacy, by taking your personal information and putting it on their own balance sheet as a money-making asset. You make money by providing something different. That something different is real privacy, letting your users control the use of information about themselves rather than handing it over to Mark Zuckerberg. So that's our first authenticity enterprise other than PKI Press, which is just book publisher. And they presented, they presented actually at We Share Fest in Paris last month. This month they'll be in London, and next month they'll be in London at Sharing Economy conferences, showing sharing economy businesses that they can be the providers of universal identity.
Cool.
They get to brand it, their own brand too.
Well, so because of my other roles in the world, I have to ask if you have any relationship with let'sencrypt.org from the Linux Foundation. Are you familiar with that?
Oh yeah, I am very familiar. And Let's Encrypt, and now Startcom, which, by the way, is an authenticity enterprise, both offer a streamlined access to site certificates, which is a positive development if you believe in site certificates.
Right.
If, on the other hand, you believe that we need to go back to, I'm the first one to say that the distinguishing features of the quiet enjoyment infrastructure come as much from the 19th century as from any time. We are not, we're not bleeding edge technology, and we're certainly not bleeding edge principles. So going back before the telephone century, when a person, a stranger was likely to show up on your doorstep wanting to do business with you or do something with you, and you had no way of checking out the identity claim of the stranger without a notarized letter of introduction, some kind of authoritative support for their claim of identity. Now here we are in the 21st century, back in the 19th century, where people show up on your doorstep all the time. You have no way of knowing whether their identity claim is accurate. What's the solution? Well, instead of a wax seal, we have a digital certificate. But otherwise, in principle, it's the same idea. So where did I go? How did I get started on this?
Well, I asked about Let's Encrypt.
Yeah, Let's Encrypt. Yeah, they good access to site certificates. We believe a site certificate needs to be digitally signed by the signing officer of the organization that owns the domain, and that a site certificate is kind of like a server certificate. Like, in our view of the information infrastructure, all is just plumbing except for personal attestations. Everything, if there's a personal attestation behind a domain, then it's legit and it ought to have the green address bar. If not, site certificate, hey, it's easy to fake the claims behind a site certificate, even with a diligent organization like StartCom, which I have to say is they really, that company has a lot of integrity and they do an excellent job. But you can run into financial trouble, sell your site to a bunch of crooks, and you've still got your, as we saw with ToySmart, there's this whole other story there.
Sure. Well, cool. Well, Wes, I really appreciate it. It's good to know that some of us who let us into the greater online world are still out there trying to make that online world a better place. I appreciate your efforts. I appreciate the service that you created in the past that contributed to my education and my expanded knowledge of the world. I'm sure we have a number of listeners who would share that sentiment. Neil, have you got anything else you wanted to ask Wes?
No, I just wanted to say thank you as well, and I really enjoyed that. It definitely sounds like you guys are the pioneers. I mean, you were pioneers back then, and it sounds like you're pioneers now with this security. This is great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed this too, and we do. We feel we're onto something, as we say on our site, as big as the internet itself. Authenticity is as big as the internet itself. So.
Cool. Yeah, definitely be good to get back to personal integrity being really the as they used to say, the mark of the man, so to speak, rather than just people hiding behind anonymity and whatever.
We can do it.
All right. Well, Wes, I really appreciate it. It's great to have you as our first big guest interview. We did have an interview with a fellow CoCo developer, but I'm sure he'll see the distinction here. I wanted to ask, there's a guy in the retro community does a lot of interviews. His name is Kevin Savitz. I wonder has Kevin ever talked to you?
I don't think so.
Oh, wow. So we scooped Kevin Savitz. You heard it here on the CoCo Crew. The CoCo Crew has scooped Kevin Savitz. All right. Well, thanks, Wes.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the broadcast.
Thank you, John and Neil.
Hi, I'm Kevin Savitz of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. You're listening to the CoCo Crew. When you're ready to play with a real computer, play with an Atari.
All right, so the past several episodes, we've tried to include a host discussion topic. People seem to enjoy that. We try to pick something that's maybe not too confrontational, but sometimes something that's a little bit controversial, or at least something that people will have opinions on both sides. I think we've got a good one this time. We just returned from CoCo Fest, and both Neil and I had items for sale at CoCo Fest. And as did a number of other people have items for sale at CoCo Fest, and most of which at least claim to be offering some sort of CoCo Fest discount. And so the topic that we're going to discuss here is, should there be special deals available to CoCo Fest attendees? Basically, is it fair that you get to pay less for something if you go to CoCo Fest? Is that or is it unfair to the people who wanted to go but just couldn't make it? So, of course, joining me on this discussion, without which it wouldn't be much of a discussion, is Neil. So, Neil, what is your take on this? Is it fair to include or to offer discounts to CoCo Fest attendees? And if so, I don't know, how big of a discount and why is it fair?
Well, I think it is fair for the one fact that, people made it all that way to CoCo Fest. Even if you don't offer a deal, the fact you don't have to pay shipping, I mean, that alone is a good saving, right?
Right.
So, I mean, even if you want to just set the price the same And then, because they're there, they can just pick it up. I mean, you're going to save $10, $15 right there.
Sure. But that's not really offering a deal in that case. They're just not paying to ship.
Right. I mean, if people made it all that way, I mean, why not have a deal? Have a special price at your booth.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it makes sense from a vendor's perspective that, I mean, not only do you not have to ship anything, so you don't have to pay the shipping, but, that kind of falls out in the price anyway. So you say, well, why should they get a further break? They're already not paying shipping. But as a vendor, I don't have to box it. I don't have to wrap it. I don't have to carry it down to the post office, which most people would not include that as a charge in the shipping. Most people, if they're going to pay the shipping at the post office, you're going to have to charge pretty much what the post office charges you. So, you wrapping the box and taping it up and carrying it to the post office is kind of free labor.
Right.
So at least you can avoid that. But beyond that, I think most of us are in the hobby for at least somewhat for fellowship. And those of us who go to CoCo Fest are definitely in it partly for the fellowship of going to CoCo Fest. I think it makes sense from the hobby perspective of, why shouldn't I give my fellow hobbyist that cares enough about fellowship to come and offer his fellowship in exchange for mine? Why shouldn't I knock a couple of bucks off if I can?
For sure.
I think it makes a lot of sense to encourage people to come. The other thing is, whether you reduce the price or not, in many cases, when you're making things in a hobby fashion, like not this year, but certainly last year when I had my handmade cartridge cases for Farfall, I only made so many, partly because they take a while to produce. And so in that case, whether there's a price break or not, you still got to come to CoCo Fest to get them, because in that case they sold out almost immediately. So I guess the point is there's always going to be an advantage to going to CoCo Fest if you're looking to buy stuff, right? Because you might not get another chance to buy them because people, it might just be sold out.
Yeah, exactly. They might do a first run and they might not do a second run.
I'm not sure that really, from a completely objective perspective, I'm not sure that justifies charging less. If anything, maybe you should charge more because you might run out. Right.
But it does guarantee somebody that product, or
I mean, it should. Yeah, it definitely encourages them to come. But I'm just looking at it from the objective question of, should you offer a special deal? Well, maybe you shouldn't offer a special deal to the people who are already kind of getting a special deal by being there. In the special deal being that they get a chance to buy it. Maybe you should charge full price at CoCo Fest, and then if you got any left over, maybe that's when you should put them on sale. Right? I mean, it kind of makes sense.
And the other advantage you have, if you come to CoCo Fest, you get to meet the creator, maybe get an autograph.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, but the case you're making is it's a great thing to come to CoCo Fest. When none of that says, if you're doing all the great thing to come to CoCo Fest, none of that really justifies you also get a break, right? It's like you should come anyway, even if you don't get a break, is sort of the case you're making. Which I agree, everybody should come to CoCo Fest for a variety of reasons. But so I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a tradition. People make kind of CoCo Fest discounts available. And I think that goes back into the Rainbow Fest days. I don't know. Maybe there's not a good case for it other than just we're all so happy that we're at CoCo Fest. It's like, sure, take $5 off. Why not?
Yeah, or we're just in such a good mood.
Yeah. Maybe that's it.
Or you might see a limited edition, CoCo Fest edition.
Right. Maybe, you make a CoCo Fest edition of something. Maybe that's what should be the special part, not that it's cheaper.
Might not be so much the money, but it's a different item, right? It's a special item.
Right. Well, like I said, we're in agreement that people should come to CoCo Fest, and lots of benefits, including even if you're paying full price, there are plenty of benefits to coming to CoCo Fest.
Oh, for sure.
For some reason, crazy vendors give you little discounts as well. So all the more reason to come to CoCo Fest, right?
Added perk.
So I don't know. So maybe the answer is no, it's not really fair, but that's the way it is. Well, I mean, I'm sure there are people who can't travel to CoCo Fest because it's, they live in the Czech Republic or something.
Yeah, it's just not possible.
It's just not possible to get there, and damn it, then they not only get to go, they get discounts on the prices. I can see where that might be frustrating for somebody.
Yeah.
So I don't know. For what it's worth, I still have Farfall cartridges available at the same price that I was selling them at CoCo Fest. If you'd like to buy one, feel free to contact me. Still have Xmas Rush available, and if you're desperate for a Follow CoCo cartridge, I'll probably make one of those for you too.
There's still a couple joystick adapters left.
Yeah, and you said you'll continue to make those too, right?
Yeah, I'm going to do another run.
But can I get the CoCo Fest discount on that?
Well, you got to wait to 2017.
You have to come next year, right? Well, that's true. Well, that's fair enough.
See, for myself, I don't expect a CoCo Fest deal. For me, the shipping alone is the deal because, especially living in Canada, the shipping is just brutal.
Yeah.
I know I mentioned that before about Canada Post and, that sort of thing. But, every year I kind of make a list of stuff I'm going to buy off of Cloud9. And I usually, do the rounds, buy a couple of, 512K memory boards, so on. For me, it makes sense just to wait, buy it all when I'm at the fest.
Sure.
I don't expect Mark to give me a deal. It's just, the shipping alone, that is the deal.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, being a bit of a vulture, and if you don't mind kind of the brinksmanship of waiting to see if something sells or not, you could always walk the floor at about 3 p.m. on Sunday and say, hey, do you really want to carry that home, or can I buy that from you? And especially if you're talking about a big floppy drive or a monitor or some other big heavy thing, you might get a bargain.
Yeah.
I know there was in the auction, I bought kind of a box of random stuff that included a couple of floppy drive chassis. I think one of them had a floppy drive in it, but it was, there's no cover on the chassis or whatever. And but it wasn't what I was buying the box for. But somebody else wanted the floppy. I think all he wanted was the drive, but I think for something like $5, I sold him the drive with the chassis, and then I had another chassis that was in the box. I said, "Here, take this too." So even if you don't get cool stuff in the auction yourself, sometimes you can buy the extras off of somebody when they bought a lot, as in more than one thing, at the auction. So not exactly the same thing, but
kind of helping each other out.
Yeah. So, like I said, maybe you can find your own special discounts if you wait until the end of CoCo Fest. I don't know. Or you can do like Neil and just to drive home to my house and then walk away with my Amigas.
The vehicle was loaded. I could barely see out the back window. Going down the interstate.
Yeah. Well, I'm still trying to make the pile for when you come next year. But, well, does that cover it?
I think it does. So what did we learn here? That there shouldn't be any deals.
Yeah. Maybe there's not a good moral case for a deal, but I think people are still going to offer them. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we like deals. We like being bigwigs, making the deals, and basically we would like to make CoCo Fest a good experience for our fellow Fest attendees. So I suspect there will still be CoCo Fest deals no matter what the outcome of this discussion is.
Yeah. Everyone's got to go home with something.
Yeah. But if you didn't go home with a Farfall cartridge, feel free to contact me. I will hook you up. All right. Well, I think that wraps this up. So I guess we'll move on to tech segment. And
then the games corner.
And the games corner. So so
We'll move on.
Now, if there is any dedicated group of old computer users, it is certainly the people who still love their CoCo, the Tandy color computer.
All right, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. This is John, and I'm going to be doing a technical segment for your enjoyment. Rather than some of our more traditional technical segments, which have been kind of historical in nature, this one is going to discuss a project that I originally did in the late last fall, and got some excitement around it from Neil, and he wanted to produce some actual devices for sale, and he went ahead and did that and got them out for CoCo Fest. And of course, what I'm talking about is the Sega Genesis joypad adapter for the CoCo 3. What's cool about this device is not only does it let you adapt the Genesis joypad for use with the CoCo 3 for the normal directions and a button, or even two buttons, but we actually the circuit actually allows for use of all four buttons on the Sega Genesis joypad. There's the 3 action buttons, and of course there's a start button. Theoretically, the hardware should be able to support 6 buttons, or I guess really 7 on the later Genesis joypads, but I haven't got the software worked out there, and so I'm not going to claim 6 buttons at this point. But anyway, for those that don't know, the Genesis joypad, for the most part, follows the kind of de facto standard that was set by the Atari 2600 joystick. So that was the original Atari 2600, CX40 or CX41? I forget. Anyway, that joystick was a pretty simple device that had 4 directions and 1 single action button, and they were all just switches, and those 5 signals would all just be grounded out when activated. And of course, the color computer joystick is an analog device, and so it has 2 potentiometers, and they're wired as voltage dividers, and as you move the joystick around, the potentiometers change, and so the voltages produced at their center tap varies with the position. The buttons on the CoCo joysticks are actually the same as on the Atari joystick, so that's one less thing to convert. So those just operate by grounding out a signal. So the first step, of course, in converting these joysticks over is how do you convert the directions. So it turns out there's a couple of circuits that are out there. If you Google around, and I'm not as confident in all of them. Some of them I'm more confident in than others. But the particular circuit that I ended up using actually originated with the, as far as I know, it originated with the February 1984 edition of Color Computer magazine. And there's a circuit design described there. The article's Atari joystick adapter on page 135 of that issue of Color Computer magazine. And it's a pretty simple device. You have one integrated circuit. It's a 4066, which is a CMOS device, and it's really just 4 switches, and so you have 4 inputs that control the switches, and then when the switches are activated, it just connects one side to the other. Pretty simple stuff, right? The circuit is pretty simple. Each of the control points for the switches is actually wired with a pull-up resistor to the +5, which activates the switches. And then they're connected to the direction signals on the joystick. So when the joystick activates a direction, it grounds out that signal. So instead of being pulled high to activate the switches, that signal then goes low, which disables the switches, so disconnecting each side of the other switches. Each of these switches then, like I said, is normally active, but they get turned off as the direction signals are activated on the joystick. Now, how is this useful? Well, So what you do is for each axis, so there's an x-axis and a y-axis, you take two of these switches and you effectively tie them together. Well, you definitely tie them together, and that's where the signals are taken for the x and y axis. Now then on each pair, you take one switch and connect it to high, or +5, and then the other switch you connect it to low. So when both switches are active, which is the normal center stick situation, you end up with two resistors in series. The resistors are roughly the same value, or they're spec'd at the same value. So with a 5-volt signal across them, the axis will output 2.5 volts, or the center position. And so both axes work the same way, X and Y. So then what happens if you say you push the joystick to the left, and that now deactivates the switch on the left side of that signal. Well, now the center part of the pair of switches, the one that's connected to the axis signal going into the color computer, now it's disconnected from one of the resistors, and so it'll be connected purely to the other resistor, which I guess in this case, if you've pushed left, it's going to disconnect the resistor that was connecting you high, and that'll pull your axis signal that's going into the color computer, it'll pull it low, and so suddenly the input to the color is zero, to the CoCo is 0 volts. If you recenter it and then push it to the right, it does the opposite action, leaving the center signal connected, or the axis signal connected to the CoCo is then disconnected from ground and connected to 5 volts. So that goes the other way. It really is a pretty simple circuit. It's just a C switches kind of cleverly connected, and the input directions from the Atari style joystick just deactivate the switches as appropriate for their direction. Anyway, if you need a picture, which would be understandable, I'll include a link in the show notes to a blog write-up I did for this that includes a nicely drawn circuit schematic that I borrowed from somewhere else on the internet. Alright, so anyway, that covers the basic direction signal conversion. Like I said, the buttons work essentially the same way on both the Atari and the CoCo. So for a single button, you just wire them directly up. One button works, and that works great for the CoCo 1 or 2. And it works great for that one button on the CoCo 3. And so if you were going to be dealing with a Sega Master System joypad, which was also used this de facto 9-pin set of signals for the directions, the Sega Master System added a second button, and it did it in the most obvious way by allocating another signal on the 9-pin connector. And so if you're just converting the Sega Master System, you just hook up the second button in the same fashion as the first button, just to the second button input on pin 6 of the DIN connector going into the CoCo, or the CoCo 3. And that works fine. And so there you have it. There's your basic circuit that will support either an Atari-style joystick going into a CoCo 1 or 2, or 3 for that matter, and just only be able to use the one button. You can use the Sega Master System controller at that point going into a Color Computer 3, and has support for both buttons. So that's great. Unfortunately, the Sega Master System controllers they're not uncommon, but they've gotten to the point where they're a little bit harder to find and maybe a little more expensive, whereas the Sega Genesis controllers are fairly easy to find, and in fact they're even still producing new devices that are compatible with the Sega Genesis. So it'd be nice if we could make use of the Sega Genesis controller. And at first glance, you'd think that you would be able to, because they basically have the same pinout, for at least for the use of the first two buttons, as the Sega Master System, which of course is not surprising, right? The thing is, you kind of hit a little bit of a snag when trying to adapt that to the CoCo, and here's why. So on the CoCo, the joystick buttons are wired up, and where they essentially reuse some of the lines that are used for scanning the inputs to the keyboard. And so keyboard scan has a number of rows and columns set up in a matrix, and you activate a certain row and then check to see which columns are activated, that sort of thing, right? Fine. And a couple of those column pins are then are being used for button inputs, and so there's already a possibility for conflict in certain cases between button inputs and the joystick input, the joystick button inputs and the keyboard inputs. And I think most of us are at least somewhat familiar with that. The wrinkle is that on the Sega Genesis, when they added to the controller, they added essentially 2 more buttons. It looks like a 3-button controller, but if you look closer, it's really a 4-button controller because of the start button. And so what they did, instead of adding 2 more buttons, 2 more wires in the controller, which would sort of violate the whole 9-pin connector thing, they had 1 more pin to spare, and they used it as a switching signal, so that the 2 buttons, the 2 action button signals, which 2 buttons they represent changes based on the value of this switching signal. So if that's switching input, so you have that one signal that actually goes from the Genesis back out to the controller, or in this case from the CoCo back out to the controller. To implement that switching, there's a device inside the Genesis controller. It's a little integrated circuit, and that circuit doesn't just pass through the signals directly from the buttons, so that you'd have just a higher ground or whatever. They do it in an easier fashion. That basically they regenerate the signal from one side of the switch to the other, or one side of the chip to the other. And the net effect being, and I'm sure I'm losing a lot of you, but the net effect being that the value that comes back in from the controller on the button pins is a driven value. It's either driven high or driven low. And when this is then put onto these lines that are shared with the keyboard scan is looking for those lines to potentially go low, depending on what keys you're scanning for. And so when they're being driven from the joystick input, that prevents those keys from working. And it doesn't just not work when you're looking at the joystick, it just doesn't work basically at all. And so the net effect being that unless you do something about it, you can't use a Genesis controller directly wired into, no matter what, you can't directly wire it into the CoCo without something in between. So having figured this out, the answer is actually fairly obvious, as you can use a diode on each line, so that if the Genesis tries to drive the line high, it has no effect. The signal is blocked by the diode, but the Genesis can still pull the line low. And so that combination of abilities or whatever meets what's expected from the CoCo 3 design, and now allows you to use the Genesis style controller with the CoCo 3 and or even the CoCo 2, as long as you're only using those 2 of the buttons. Right? So far so good, but like I said, we want to be able to use the extra 2 buttons since they're there. And so, as I've sort of outlined before, the Genesis controller has an additional signal line that goes into the controller from the game, or in this case from the CoCo, and basically says which 2 buttons are you representing, or it tells you which 2 buttons to represent on the 2 button lines that come back out from the controller. So they're normally either B and C, which would correspond basically to buttons 1 and 2, or they can be A and start. And so that's fine. That's a simple 5-volt input, and the CoCo just has to drive that, right? Except that the CoCo by default doesn't really have a way to drive that. There's no 5-volt single bit output on the back of the CoCo. There's no way to just output 5 volts on the joystick port. So what do we do? the one output that sort of is available, and it kind of depends on what else you're doing with it. If you're using drive wire, it's not particularly available, but you can unplug it while you play a given game, I guess. But there is a RS-232 port on the back of the CoCo, and we have it's a 4-pin port, one of which is ground. That's 3 signal lines. 2 of those signal lines actually are inputs for the CoCo, so that's receive and the carrier detect line. But the one line is an output, so the CoCo theoretically can drive an output there. The problem being is that signal is already conditioned inside the CoCo to be an RS-232 signal level, which it's not a simple +5 output. And in fact, it's inverted and scaled and whatever. It's not directly compatible with the signal needed by the Genesis controller. Fortunately, a fairly simple circuit can be used involving a transistor and a couple of resistors. And since we already have the +5 value available out at the joystick port, that transistor can gate that +5 value out on the basis of the RS-232 level signal being sent from the CoCo. This basically puts control of the joystick into the hands of the CoCo, so you can tell him whether to represent the B and C buttons on the joystick input or the A and start buttons on the joystick input. That control is fairly simple. It's done through the address. In decimal, it's 65312. I don't have the hex value in front of me, but I'm sure you can convert it out. So you can poke that with a 0 to switch the buttons one way, and poke it with a 2, which represents the 1 bit going out, to set the buttons the other way. And so, if all of that's not clear, again, you can refer back to my blog post. I'll put a link in the show notes. I do have a schematic available online. It's the same schematic I used in KiCad when I was building the PCBs that ended up in the converters that Neil built. So like I said, if you get one of these converters, plug it into your CoCo 3, plug a Genesis controller into each side of the converter, or one side, however you want to do it. With just a simple matter of a little extra software, now we have access to, including the start button, 4 buttons on the Sega Genesis controller. The only thing we're really missing now is a game that uses all 4 buttons. I think we can probably figure that out. We have some games that use 2 buttons. I'm sure we can figure out a use for, a 3rd button. The 4th button, of course, is the start button. So if nothing else, you can use that just to start the game. Maybe even make it do double duty as a pause button. The 3 buttons, maybe that's a jump and a duck and a throw, or something like that. Or, maybe it's phasers, shields and a bomb, or whatever. So it's there. A number of these are now out in the community, thanks to Neil selling them at CoCo Fest. He still has them available, and I think he's still willing to make some more if people want to buy them. It's my design that builds upon an earlier design. I'd love to see some games get made that use the extra buttons and take advantage of the CoCo 3 and do some cool stuff. But anyway, like I said, it's a pretty simple design. The direction conversions are a fairly simple circuit. The buttons by themselves are pretty simple. The 2 buttons would just be straight through, but on the Genesis, since the Genesis drives the button signals high or low, you have to use a couple of diodes to coexist with the keyboard scanning. And then if you want to switch between the B and C versus A and start buttons on the Genesis controller, we need another way to signal that switch. We'll use the one input on the RS-232 serial port that would normally be for transmitting, and use a transistor to convert that level out to something that's suitable for the Genesis, and then there you go. Bob's your uncle. Anyway, well, that's probably enough for this for now. So I hope you enjoyed this this talk through, and like I said, I'll put a link in the show notes to the blog posts in case you need a little extra written words to help guide. And of course, you can always reach out to me through the feedback at CoCoCrew.org or John at CoCoCrew.org, or however else you might find to send me some email, and I'll be happy to discuss things with you. Okay? Well, hope you enjoyed that, and CoCo forever.
Welcome back, CoCo Gamers. On this episode, I will be reviewing one of Rick Adams' beauties, and this game is called Shanghai. It is a strategy puzzle type game, and it is based off of the original tile game originated in China called Mahjong. The object of this game is to clear all 144 tiles from the screen. You can clear tiles by finding matching pairs. Sounds easy, but not really. The tricky part is you can only pull tiles from the right or left, and they cannot be blocked by tiles in one of those sides you are pulling from. You also cannot pull a tile if there's another one on top of it. This game sounds simple, but is very addictive. I can't count how many hours my sister or I played this game back when we first got it. Oh, and speaking of when we first got this game, I will never forget it. I was only 11 years old, and I remember saving up enough paper route money to buy it. I went to visit my grandparents one weekend in their city, and I always liked to check out their Radio Shack because it was one of those cool ones where it was half Radio Shack and half mom and pop repair shop. I went in not knowing what game to buy, and there it was, this big box with the title Shanghai. It was calling me, so I just had to choose that one. When I had gone home Sunday night after visiting with my grandparents, I opened the game to try it. Much to my surprise, it was a cartridge. I never noticed the label on the box, and I had just assumed it was a floppy disk-based game because of the box size. I had thought all ROM cartridge games came in either small, cardboard, or plastic cases. Afterwards, I learned some other games like Thexter also came in the big box packages as well. Shanghai requires a Tandy Color Computer 3 with 128K of memory. It was coded by Rick Adams for Activision in 1987. I think Rick did a fantastic job of making this version for the CoCo. The graphics and colors are incredible. It still looks good today. If you look at some of the other ports of this game made at that time on other platforms, this version shines. It supports RGB, or composite color mode, and there is also a third hidden color mode which I just learned about last year from Rick himself on a Facebook thread. It is in the upper left corner of the screen in only one spot. See if you can find it. I sure did. It is a yellow shadow based color set. Note, this Easter egg only works on the original cartridge version. This game was later ported to OS 9 by Bill Noble and Alan DeCock. The OS 9 version requires a Color Computer 3 with a minimum of 256K memory. This version also supports different tile sets. Well, there you go. Hope I inspired some of you to give this classic another whirl. And for the few of you who have never played or heard of this game, a reason to check it out. Clear all 144 tiles and see what awaits you at the end. Keep CoCo games rolling. Until next month, happy CoCo gaming. Well, there you have it. The end of episode 13. We hope you enjoyed this jam-packed episode. I'd like to thank our host, John Linville, for making it through those extra long news segments and providing us tech segments each month. Also like to thank Wes Kuzmal for spending time with us during the interview. And last but not least, all of you listeners for your support and dedication to our podcast. Feel free to send us your feedback. We'd like to hear from you. Until next month, CoCo forever.